It was the 3rd day of February 2012 in the Brazilian state of Rio Grande, and this is something I'll never forget. So my sisters, my mother, and me went to have some fun at the beach, pretty far from our home. Our mother had rented the house of a friend for a few days, which we used while going to and coming back from the beach. It was one of those very dirty sort of beach places where trash was dumped all around, and not that many people were going to it. But for us, it was a pretty fun getaway. I even remember joking to my sister that there are probably sharks in this beach. It was a hot day too, and I have the skin of a vampire, so after the first day on the beach, I was looking like Mr. Krabs, and I had to stay in that house while they went to have some fun, which for me was totally okay. I'm kind of introverted anyway. Now one day, my mother and my sister, except for my youngest one, had all gone to go to some specific place. One went to color their nails, the other went to have a massage, two decided to go back to the beach, and my mum was going to go to a club with her friends because she was a boomer or whatever. But my younger sister went to sleep, and basically, it was just me in this 2-floor house, which was way bigger than the home that I was raised in. But the place was kind of creepy, I guess. And it didn't help that the moon that day was full. I was young and a stupid kid, I guess you could say, who was scared to death by creepy nights and also full of energy. So I jumped over the fence of our house by climbing over it. My thoughts at the time were pretty stupid, but I was going to look for my mum. I did that without thinking about stuff like, the possibility of me getting kidnapped or killed by some robber or whatever. This is Brazil, after all. Street crime is high, really high here. Anyway, I walked a little bit around the town, but then I realized that I was lost. I was utterly overwhelmed by the same modern buildings, and I had no idea as to where I was. I also had no idea of where my mum was. I knew the name of the place where she went, but I didn't know how to get there or exactly where that was. After the fear of being lost fully took over, I decided to give up and just go back to the house, but I didn't know where the house was at this point, so I just sort of walked around. There were very few people around that night, and I was way too anxious to ask anyone I saw for help or directions. Eventually, though, the road mixed with this path of dirt. It sort of looked like the path in front of the house that we were staying at, so I thought that I was in the right direction, since I took another path after getting out of the house, but there were several others which this path could lead to. So I walked, and eventually I found a beach. Not the beach where I went with my sisters, but a different one. But little me did not know that, so I ran into the beach because I thought that I could find two of my sisters there and they could bring me back home. Obviously, they were not at the beach, but something else was. Now, this beach had these rocks leading up to outside the water. Those sort of spiked rocks that normally sink ships? Those ones. And one of them was all the way into the sand, and I kept seeing something moving beside it from the corner of my vision. So I just sort of stood there and looked at the rock for a bit. Then, something came out from beside the rock. This thing. It seemed to be about the size of a fully grown man, but it stood straight. It had legs and feet, but whatever it was, it definitely wasn't human. And the biggest proof was the left arm that I saw. So, centipedes, right? Those black things with 1,000 legs? Well, this left arm was exactly like that. The thing extended to the ground and it moved like it had a life of its own. I could see all of the legs moving on it too. The whole body of this thing was weird, and not just the centipede arm. That green guy from Nightmare Before Christmas? Well, this man was kind of like that, but made of skin and with an egg-shaped head. I don't know what the man did after he saw me, because after seeing him in the clear moonlight, with the ocean backdrop, my child self was absolutely terrified, and I just straight up bolted away from there. I ran away as far and as fast as I could from that beach, never looking back. Eventually, too, while running on this dirt path, one of my sisters, thank the Lord, found me. It looks like they were looking for me for a while, and once we got back to the house, I got scolded real bad by my mother, who was angry as anything with me for running away. She thought that I was kidnapped or something like that and was about to call authorities. I did tell this story to my sisters. Obviously, they found it to be unbelievable. In fact, the only one that believes is the youngest, but she also believes in all that witchcraft stuff, so I guess her belief is sort of already wonky. To be clear with you guys, though, I don't believe in the supernatural stuff like werewolves, Bigfoot, greys, and all that stuff. I think of all of it as just conspiracy theories and stupid beliefs based on zero proof. But to this day, I really do believe that man thing was real. I actually saw it. I wasn't hallucinating. It was there, and it was as real as I was. The memory, it's still very vivid in my mind, and again, I have no idea what it was, but it was real. I saw it, and I'll never forget it. So I am from Madrid, Spain. My family is from a small mountain city. We're all familiar with the mountains here. Even though I live in Madrid, I always go to hike in the mountain range surrounding Madrid. I would not consider us to be very superstitious and or believe strongly in supernatural events, although I am a huge fan of folklore. But this story, it happened in summer. Back when I was 14 years old, my mother took me and my brother for a week-long trip to a mountain range in the southeast of Spain, close to the old town of Riopa Viejo. We had already spent half of the week going on multiple hikes, and we visited beautiful lakes where me and my brother could swim, despite them being super cold. Overall, we had already had a lot of fun, and we were enjoying our small family trip so far. Now one day, while it was very sunny and warm, we went on a hike again to this kind of, like, abandoned trail, I guess, which some of the locals of the village, they had recommended it. It wasn't accessible by car and there was no phone service. We didn't care though, because we love to spend time in nature, and we would just spend our time walking and talking instead of being on our phones. We found a crystal clear lake at one point, with beautiful turquoise greenish water and lots of water vegetation in it too. My brother and I immediately jumped in, and afterwards we had a picnic for lunch. So far so good, right? Suddenly, while we were enjoying our lunch, we heard a loud scream. It was very high-pitched and sort of just overall scary, I guess. Considering the fact that we were next to the lake, in a small valley between tall mountains, we could hear it kind of echoing. All three of us immediately looked at each other, sort of startled. We were certainly not imagining anything. From what we could deduce, the sound came from the other side of the lake, in a very sort of bushy area. The lake itself was not very big, and we decided to make our way around it to investigate. Because, although we had not seen anyone during the entire day out there, maybe someone was in danger, or maybe someone needed help. I cannot really specify what the scream exactly sounded like. In hindsight, it was not your typical scream for help, but who knows what humans are capable of sounding like when in dire need of help, right? Anyway, after a 20-minute walk, we were already getting to the entrance of the bushy area at the other side of the lake, all three of us approaching with our walking sticks in hand and in a cautious position. The first thing that we noticed was an awful smell of rotting flesh that, together with the scream earlier, made us feel a sudden sense of dread. Normally, you would feel welcome when helping someone out, but we didn't feel welcome at all in this place. My instincts were telling me that we should just backtrack our way out of there, while not losing sight of the bushy area, that is. However, we could not shake the feeling that we had to help if someone needed it. So we decided to proceed slowly instead. The joy and the laughter that we had on the other side of the lake was now gone, Whatever was going on at this side of the lake, it felt wrong and ominous. Now, I cannot talk to my brother or mother's behalf, but the hair on my arms was standing on end. And after making our way through the bush for 10 minutes, we finally reached a sort of clearing area. During this whole time, the sense of dread had continued, and the awful smell of rotting flesh had only increased. Finally, in the middle of the clearing, we saw what had caused this smell. In what seemed to be the perfect middle of this small clearing, we found the dead corpse of a deer, or at least what remained from it. The limbs were removed from its torso, and the head was, well, half-eaten. The thing is, though, is that the cadaver looked fairly fresh, as if it was killed that same day. However, the smell was still that of a rotting and decayed corpse, which, I don't know, that did not make any sense. We checked for footprints or dung in the clearing, but we didn't find anything. I guess a logical explanation would be wolves, or maybe even bears, since we have both of them in rural Spain. However, the missing footprints and the way of how this deer was ripped apart made it seem almost unnatural. After we had checked the surroundings, we left as quickly as possible, and on our way back, we did not stop to rest at the lake or anything. We just wanted to get out of there as quickly as we could. Now, when we were leaving the valley behind us, halfway up one of the surrounding mountains, we heard yet another scream, similar to the first one. However, this time, we didn't feel the urgency to check if someone needed help. Instead, we paced up our speed and we didn't go back. Somewhere in the evening, when we finally had made it back to our village, we went for dinner at a small old bar in the picturesque town square. We talked to some of the elder people from the village about our experience with their abandoned trail and all that, and they told us that apparently we had somewhere taken a wrong turn on the trail, since it was not very clear in that this was the reason we ended up at the valley with the lake. They also told us that a few centuries back, during the Spanish Inquisition, the local townspeople had gone to that valley because a so-called witch lived there and set her house on fire, killing the poor old woman. Since then, the locals never hike close to that lake or its surroundings in the valley. A couple of days later, we left to go back home, but we have never been able to shake the feeling of the dread that we experienced that day. Again, we are not superstitious or big believers of the supernatural by any means, but what happened on that day was, well, definitely weird. I was a third shifter in Wisconsin, US, around 2014, who lived about 20 minutes from my workplace in the country. Now, as I was pulling up into the section of the country back road that immediately led into the city, I saw probably the strangest sight that I have ever seen in my life, and I cannot explain it. It was twilight, almost evening, and so the trees were all black against the dark blue sky, and I simply happened to glance up at the top of one of the trees as I was driving, and what I originally thought was the top of the tree flew up into the air at lightning speed and disappeared. It looked like a humanoid thing with wings, but it was so fast that I could barely make out anything else. But it definitely had legs and wings. It just lifted up. The figure with wings that I thought was the top of the tree just flew up and disappeared, lightning fast. I've never seen anything fly that fast. Honestly, it was like a blink. I remember stopping my car outside of my workplace and just sitting there and thinking about what I just saw and wondering if I was crazy or if I imagined it. We don't have any animals or anything natural that looks anything like that, so I have no idea what it was. I decided not to tell my coworkers or anybody ever except until now because, well, it's been about 10 years and it's bothered me this whole time. Do you guys have any ideas as to what this could have been? I wouldn't call myself a complete believer of the paranormal, but I'm not someone who writes it off completely either. I'm a skeptic, I guess you could say, that's open and willing to believe if given proof. I have family that is deeply involved with this type of stuff, though, and has their own experiences with the paranormal. I've got a few things that happen to me that I can't entirely explain normally. However, the one that I'm about to describe is by far the one that has no type of logic that can debunk it, at least to my knowledge so far. Now, to better understand my experience, you have to understand the layout of my bathroom for it, because it happened in the shower. On my second floor, there's 4 rooms counting the bathroom. You walk up the stairs and you'll see one room straight across from the base of the stairs, while 2 rooms, they follow the wall on the right to said room, finishing with a room mirroring the one at the base of the stairs. Once you enter the bathroom, immediately to the right is my sink and mirror. The sink is about maybe 4-ish feet off the ground. Next to the sink is my bath or shower, blocked by a wall so it doesn't connect to my sink. Straight across from the door is the toilet, and I had my door closed, no one else in the bathroom, nor any pets. Since my shower is also a bathtub, there's a ledge where me and my family members will keep shampoos, body washes, etc., etc., etc. And I began to wash my hair, place the shampoo on the ledge. As I go to put it down, I placed it a bit too close to the edge and it fell off. I heard the bottle roll around a bit and ultimately come to a stop. I think, oh well, I'll just grab it when I get out. I begin to finish up in the shower, get out to grab my towel, blah blah blah. I look on the ground to find the shampoo bottle, but I can't. I sort of look around for a little while, and after a few seconds of searching, I look up to see the bottle sitting perfectly on the sink. Again, the sink is about 4 feet off the ground, and it's away from the shower altogether. I heard it rolling on the ground, and there's a wall separating my bath and sink. I have asked my family members if they did it or someone was just messing with me, but to this day, no one has claimed to have done it. And to be honest, I think I would have heard someone or seen them perhaps if they had come in. So, does anyone here have any form of explanation for this? I'm still scratching my head over it, and it really, really freaks me out. So this story takes place close to 20 years ago at this point. I was spending a lot of time with my friends Danny and Kate. We were all sitting on Danny's couch watching TV one day. Danny says I'm bored and let's do something. As we suggest things, I say, "Hey, have you guys ever heard of the smelter?" For background, this all takes place in Arizona, Prescott to be exact, and the smelter is located in Humboldt, Arizona. It is very old, late 1800s I think. It used to process metals, I should say, but we start driving out there, smoking cigarettes and listening to music. We arrive and I start telling them how we hung out here every weekend in junior high. My best friend at the time, Mike, lived in Humboldt. So we would take girls to the smelter and just drink, usual kid stuff. Nothing even remotely weird ever happened back then, so I guess that's why I was totally unprepared for what was going to unfold. We approached the outside of the smokestack, and I noticed that the stairs had finally been ripped down. I guess whoever owned the property was sick of punk kids entering. I say, guess someone finally took the stairs out. I then explained the holes every couple of feet in the catwalk, how they must have used the holes to shovel the ash. Giving up on entering, we moved to the side, and after what I'm about to tell you, I'm glad that we couldn't get in. I mean, someone definitely would have been hurt. So, we're outside for about 15 minutes being loud and just joking around. Then it suddenly got really quiet and still, and thousands of bats came screeching out of the windows of the smelter. I mean, an absolutely ridiculous amount of them. I say to them, "We've been standing out here making noise for close to 20 minutes. We didn't scare those bats." And right when I said that, we heard a sort of loud thud hit the ground, like something heavy fell down a porthole, and then silence. Our eyes widened, nobody said anything, and another thud, then one more, and to this day, I will never be able to explain this next bit. We started hearing the loudest screeches like ever. Dust started flying up like a bird was dying on the ground, but nothing was there. They circled us, getting closer, and all we could really do was huddle closer together. It was like we forgot that we could run, I guess, but I forgot who ran first. I kind of remember being out of it, but not thinking correctly, I guess. But anyways, we ran, and the first thing Denny said was, if someone told me that story, I would never believe them. We eventually ran back, and we just got out of there. Anyways, if anyone has any leads, the rumor is that a girl was apparently killed here, but I could never confirm that. I always thought that it was an urban legend, but after this happened, there's something wrong with that place, and I don't know what it is. When I was 13 or 14, I'm 20 now, I used to go to park at open gym. Basically, I went there for a few days, saw a girl there almost my age for several days. Then one day I just gathered courage and I asked her about directions, just an excuse to talk with her. Then we started talking. Then eventually we kind of became friends. I don't even remember a bit what we talked about, besides the direction question. The only weird thing is that no one ever used to look at her besides me. She only ever talked to me. She didn't used to go to school either. Not like I have a weak memory about anything too, but it just isn't there. Then she asked me to go for a walk. I went behind her and we started running or racing. Then she stopped me in the middle of the race and said, "Let's not go there, weird guys sit there." Which was true, a part of that park is filled with people who do drugs and alcohol and stuff. But I told her it's fine to come with me, and we did, and no one stopped us. We started running in circles on that park, and then the next day I came again and she was there doing some exercise on that open gym. I went near her and said hi. Then we started talking about something, which I really can't think of again, but she used to like talking with me, so she was showing some interest. Eventually, I had a mobile phone. I handed her paper with my number, and she took it. Then we again went for that run and said bye to each other and went back home. The thing that happened here, though, is that she called me the next day at exactly 12:02 a.m. and said that she wanted to see me and asked to come out. Then I had to cut the call because my mum asked who's there. I told her that it was the wrong number and I went to sleep. Obviously, I wasn't allowed to go outside around that time, but then the next day I gathered some courage again and called that number back during the afternoon. The exact same number. I told her that someone called me, a girl, and they said that he owns the number and doesn't have any daughter. In fact, he didn't even live close to that area because I asked him. Then I went to the park for more than a week, and it was regularly around that time that she was always there, but I never saw her again. No one talked about her too, and she never told me her house, nothing. She sort of just disappeared. Was she grounded by her parents, or did I just experience something weird? I'm not too sure, but what I do have is a recording of me walking, but I thought that she was there, but in the recording, there's no one. So I guess my question is, did I hallucinate this? Am I going crazy? But I still have her number, or the number at least that I called back that I swore that she spoke to me on. I don't know. The whole thing freaks me out, and to be honest with you, I just want to forget about it. I was about 16 years old, and I lived with my family in Laveen, Arizona. The family at the time consisted of me, my 2 younger brothers, my mum, and my stepdad. So, it was late at night, or early in the morning, I guess you could say. I had gotten out of bed upstairs, since we had a 2-story house, and I went downstairs to get some food. Eventually, my middle brother, who would have been about 13, came down too. We ultimately decided to watch some TV in the living room, so we stayed downstairs. I needed to use the restroom, so I excused myself and went to the half bath in the hall leading to our garage and laundry. My stepdad, he came downstairs and he told my brother to go to bed before sounding confused. "Who was in this bathroom?" he asked. "I am," I answered. From what my brother told me, he took a step back in shock. I then heard him say, "I saw you upstairs. You stood outside your room when I left mine, stared at me, and then walked into your room." Eventually, we all left the living room and returned to our rooms, terrified. We had also been finding handprints at the time next to my baby brother's room, so maybe the thing that pretended to be me was also peeking into my brother's room occasionally. But the way the handprints were, it seemed like they stood in front of my room and peeked into the baby's room. I cannot be completely sure about that, but we definitely saw the handprints and we have no idea how they got there. This happened close to 12 years ago when I was about 16 years old in North Las Vegas. To this date, I've never had such a thing happen to me again, but it's a moment that I will never forget, and I figured that I'd share it with all of you guys who might be interested. I would like to add that I'm somewhat of a healthy skeptic, I guess you could say, and not really religious, though I am open to the idea of higher powers and anomalies and all that. Now, my older brother and I were at a house party, and when the time came for my brother to leave, I insisted on staying, knowing that I would have to walk home eventually since he was my ride. Mind you, we didn't live very far, maybe a mile or 2 at most. Fast forward to me leaving though, and I was on my way walking home. I had a nice buzz, but I definitely wasn't impaired to the point of having my vision or motor functions affected in any way that I can't blame this on. I know the whole 3 a.m. thing is super cliche, but it definitely was around that time frame, so I'm going to go ahead and say that when I started walking home, it was probably around 2-ish. The streets were wide and almost no cars to be seen. I know as a woman it's different, but as a guy I actually took comfort in cars passing at this time because for that small window, I felt like I wasn't alone walking when they were passing, if that makes sense. Anyway, the journey was eerie, but I made it to the entrance of my neighborhood. Unfortunately, my house was basically at the opposite end of this winding road, yet still a straight shot, so I had just a little ways to go at this point. Nonetheless, I knew these streets and safety was definitely on the horizon. The houses are fairly sized, I guess you could say, and as I'm walking down the sidewalk, between each house there's basically an alleyway of darkness. In the day it would be a walking path, perhaps to the backyards with, electric meters on the walls of the houses and AC units and all that. But at night, these alleys are pretty much pitch black when you look far enough. Now, as I'm walking down the sidewalk, I can't help but glare in between each house and start getting in my head and tripping myself out from my imagination. I try to slow down my roll mentally since I'm alone and stay en route. No cars have passed in a while, thus no comfort. I continue like this down the street until my house is finally in sight down the way. Obviously, I felt a little bit better with my destination now in view. Then a car comes north from the direction of my house, and I'm on the right-hand sidewalk with the road to my left, so I thought, sweet, another human to see me home, be it for just a moment. It was then when This car passed me, and after the flash of the lights, that I saw what I saw. Already looking towards the street, after the car passed on my left, something grabbed my attention in the corner of my eye, crossing the street towards me. The street lights were those yellowish ones, so the street was lit just enough for me to see it. And at first, honestly, I thought it was a dog, so I glanced directly at it. And what I saw initially, if I had to describe it, was what almost seemed to be a black silhouette of a little boy trotting towards me. I don't know if you've ever seen those typical little statues of toddlers, like in a garden section of a store, curly hair and all in a swing or whatnot. But if I had to describe the black silhouette, it resembled that of a little boy, I guess. I'm an avid gamer, so I guess I would assume that I know when to lock it in, but when this thing caught my eye with a raised brow after the car passed it, was when I did a double take to confirm what I had just seen, and I completely lost it. I remember turning directly towards it, after the glare of the headlights, after any factor that I could have blamed it on passed, for but just a second or two, enough for me to analyze it. And there it was, a shadowy little boy trotting towards me with no features, around 2.5, maybe 3 feet tall. The moment, and I mean the moment that I consciously accepted that this was happening, I literally gasped, already turning my body, and yelled as I took off full sprint towards my house. I kid you not too, it felt like I was passing a house every 2 strides, never ran so quickly in my life. And as I'm running trying to collect myself, I literally reminded myself of what had just happened, and it was like I put on the turbos. I genuinely felt like it was right behind me up until this point. I was already running as fast as I could, but my survival instinct said otherwise. I never looked back once, and I ran all the way to my house, and thank God that they left the front door open for me. I literally slammed the door behind me, and there was my dad and brother, still awake, reclined, and watching TV. I'll be 29 this August, but I remember this night vividly, and it still gives me chills when I recall this moment. I've never really shared this with, well, pretty much anyone, and you're free to believe it or not if you want. Regardless, it's still somewhat of a relief that I can finally get this off my chest. I appreciate you if you've taken the time to hear this out, and I would be happy to answer any questions in the comments below if you have any. And if anyone who has listened to this has any ideas as to what this is, then please do share it, because I would really like to know. So growing up, there was this little red shack in the woods behind my friend's house, about a mile down from my childhood home. It was really small, like the size of a garden tool shed or an outhouse maybe. The neighborhood kids, they would tell my brother and I that there was a strange hermit who lived there, who ate snakes and skunks, and we thought that they were just being kids telling scary stories. Well, just recently at Easter dinner, I was telling my parents about the hermit guy story, that my boyfriend and I went to look for this shack again and couldn't find it. I thought that maybe I'd imagined seeing it as a kid, but apparently it was real, and my parents, they knew this guy. He used to be well known and respected in the community, and was very successful at one point, until something happened. My dad said that one time while he, my dad, was slowly driving around the potholes on our road, this man ran out of the woods and jumped into the bed of his truck and ducked down, and my dad really didn't know what to do, so he just kept driving. After a few miles down the road, the man jumped out of the bed of the truck and went, well, wherever he went. This was how he got around town apparently, forced hitchhiking or whatever, and did this to people a lot. Then my mum said that when she worked at the grocery store many years ago, he would come in and buy raw hamburger and a bag of sugar, sit outside of the store, mix it together, and eat it. There are a few other things that they said that I forgot, but what had happened was this guy's mother died apparently. He found her and couldn't accept her death, so he had kept her body in the house for a few months. It deeply affected his mental health, seeing her body decay like that, and he went from very successful to living in a shack in the woods. As far as I know, he wasn't violent or dangerous, just very unpredictable and unstable in a sort of non-dangerous way, I guess. He eventually ended up in a care home where he passed away within the last couple of years. I do hope that this hermit guy ended up in heaven. I heard that he was a really nice guy before his life went downhill, and while his behavior was very unsettling, I don't think he ever hurt anybody, and didn't deserve to have the second half of his life end the way that it did. One thing that I question now, though, is, are the stories that those kids were telling, are they true? This encounter happened about 12 years ago now, but it still makes me feel incredibly uneasy. At the time, I lived in our family home with my parents and two brothers. I had a lot of very strange and unexplainable things happen in this house, but this was by far the strangest. The house, it was a 3-story, and the attic had been converted into my brother's bedroom. I came out of the bathroom on the 2nd floor to see a figure sort of rush past and run up the stairs to the attic. On the way, we had some boxes stacked up that had been knocked over in the rush. I walked straight to the boxes to stack them back up again, and as I did, I looked up the attic stairs to find someone stood there. The staircase was dark, but I could clearly see one of my brothers stood a few steps up there. At the time, my brothers looked very similar, same hairstyle, same build, same height even, so it was really hard to determine which one of them that it was, but for a few seconds we just sort of stood there and stared at each other in silence. But before my eyes could adjust to the dark to see who it was, he ran further up the stairs and into the bedroom. I heard his feet hitting the ground all the way upstairs, which made me feel uneasy as they didn't sound familiar, I guess. My brothers both have very heavy, distinct footsteps, so I could always tell who was coming before even seeing them. I didn't really question what had happened, but something just didn't really feel right, I guess. I had this chill running through me and a sinking feeling in my stomach. In any case, I made my way downstairs, and all I could think of was, which one of them is wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt today, as that is distinctively what I saw him wearing. I got downstairs and peered into the kitchen, and when I did, my stomach completely dropped, because our entire household was in the kitchen. Both of my brothers were there, both wearing shorts and colorful t-shirts. There was nobody else in the house too, so who the heck was that? It's not just the fact that I saw someone, but I heard them too. I can't describe it, but I literally felt their presence, and why did it look like my siblings? Why did it stop to stare at me and then just run away like that? Did it want me to follow it? And what would have happened if I did? So, there were these two guys that came into my work not long ago. It was normal, really, until my coworker pointed out that the two guys were staring at me very intensely. They were non-stop staring and even turning their heads to stare at me. But they were not hiding it at all, is what I'm getting at. And the stare was very predatory-like and made me extremely uncomfortable. It was like they were watching my every move. Every time I would look in their direction, they would still be staring. For context too, I work at a restaurant and we have bottomless drinks. They ordered food and had eaten it, but kept on refilling their drinks, staying at the table for at least 4 hours, which is highly unusual as customers will typically spend 45 minutes on average or less there. as we're sort of like a fast food restaurant, I guess. One guy was on his computer, though, and the other was on his phone, sometimes, but the majority of the time they were both just staring at me. They were barely talking to each other and were almost silent. One of the guys left at some point, but the other was still waiting there until I had to clock out. The guy also asked me a few questions when he asked me for ice cream, that being where I'm from, because apparently I looked foreign to him and asking if I came from Spain. It was pretty unusual to say the least, but when I left the restaurant and I turned around, the guy was right behind me, so I panicked and sort of stopped. The guy walked past me and I walked in the opposite direction, calling my mum, and thankfully I got home safe. I am nervous about this though, and I'm feeling very uncomfortable. And although nothing really happened, I guess, I'm worried that this isn't the end of this. My gut feeling is telling me that they had bad intentions. And so my question for all of you guys is, well, what should I do? I was up at 3:50 a.m. this morning on my phone, and I decided to put it down and go to sleep eventually. But not even 5 minutes later, I hear sort of shuffling upstairs outside of my door, and for some reason I decided to grab my knife because it was a little bit too weird at this time. Laying in my bed, my door slowly opens super quietly, and I ask what's up, thinking it was my roommate, and he replies, "Oh, nothing." I couldn't tell you if I'd heard that voice anywhere ever, but all I saw was a hooded black figure. He then slowly cracks my door back, but he doesn't close it, so I'm freaking out. I shoot up out of bed to open it, and when I do, he's gone. I cleared the upstairs and saw that our front door was open still when I went downstairs. The only other roommate who didn't lock this door was wide open, but he closed it before he went to sleep too. Mind you, nothing was stolen, and why he would be coming in our house and stealing nothing, I have no idea. Thank God nothing happened, but it just doesn't make much sense. About a month ago, I'm assuming that the same person opened our front door and took off after seeing us awake. The doors, they will be overly locked from now on for sure, but I don't know, something tells me that this isn't over and that whoever this is, that they'll be back. This was about 5 years ago, and it still creeps me out. I'm a female and was 18 at the time. I'm now 23, and I was walking home from work at the local pizza joint and took my usual route home. It was about 9:45 to 10:15 p.m, and it was super dark that night. As I'm getting about 100 yards away from the street that I live on, a white van turns onto the street suddenly. Nothing too suspicious, but something just didn't sit right with me, so I yanked out my earbuds and paused my music. I then turned down my street, and as I'm getting closer to my house, I started getting a weird gut feeling. I look up from my phone as I was about to text my roommate, who was out of town at the time, that I was almost home, about 15 yards or so at this point. And as I look up, I notice the white van sitting in front of my house, and the man inside is just sort of staring at me, the yellow car light shining on his face. He had brown hair, glasses, and facial hair. His van lights, they were off, but his car was running. I stopped and put my back to a tree in my neighbor's yard and just sort of stood there, maintaining eye contact with this man. After what must have been about 5 minutes, he starts driving towards the stop sign at the end of the road. I didn't turn my back to him at any point. I kept my back to the tree and maintained visual on the van the entire time until it stopped at the stop sign. He just sat there for another 2 or 3 minutes, seemingly looking in his rearview mirror at me. All the while, I'm not looking away and my back is still on the tree. Finally, though, he turned right, the direction in which I had come from, and after about 20 seconds of making sure that he or anybody else wasn't coming, I bolt to my house instantly. I quickly get inside and lock the door. I go to the window and very quietly look through the blinds. I didn't turn on any lights because, well, I'm not that stupid. And after a few seconds of looking, what do you know? He drove back up and down the street again, and then left. Afterwards, I texted my roommate what had happened, and then went to each and every one of the windows in my house to make sure that they were locked, along with the back door and the garage door too. I made sure to keep all the lights off for the remainder of the night. I didn't sleep a lick that night at all. I was so paranoid at every sound or movement. And after that, I never did walk home ever again. So I'm going to start this by saying that I always had a weird feeling in certain rooms of the house that I live in. It feels like goosebumps, I guess, but only concentrated on one point of my body. I really never thought much about it before. I kind of just thought that I was just cold, even in summer in the blazing heat, which is weird, I know, but that quickly changed when I changed rooms with my parents, who, for some reason, really wanted to move out of their room in our house. So, it all started when I was 16 years old. I started to feel like I was getting watched while playing video games, to the point where I had to turn around and take a look. Seeing nothing but the darkness of my room, I didn't think much of it. But then my dog started acting weird, barking towards my doors and growling when they were open. Also, nothing, and I mean nothing, could get this dog in the rooms. 2 weeks after my dog started acting like this, doors would just randomly be wide open at a 90-degree angle. I obviously took pictures to be 100% sure that I'd closed them, but they were wide open every single time. I rarely open my window, and there is little to no airflow in my room strong enough to open these doors too. After that, doors started slamming and reopening in front of me. It all got worse too when, after a few months, objects started falling off of my desk and on my shelves and all that, and friends of mine started having panic attacks in my room. I would hear footsteps outside and inside of my room at night, and often had the feeling like somebody was sitting on my bed. Thankfully, I'm not the only person who experienced those things in my room. In fact, I have witnesses for most of the said things. But still, to this very day, sometimes, whatever it is, it comes back to show me that it is still there. I had first moved to Portland from Minneapolis in November of 2022, and this instance happened late winter, early spring of 2023. At the time, I was living with my aunt, and it was around 1 a.m. Everybody was in bed, and I was in the living room playing the new Hogwarts Legacy game. All lights turned off except for the cast of the TV when, all of a sudden, I just get a violent chill up my spine, and every hair on my body stands straight up. I immediately break into a cold sweat, and I imagine that this is what prey feels like when something was locked on. My eyes immediately go towards the dark kitchen hallway, and I swear to you that I see long dark fingers wrap around the corner, and my breathing stops as I'm watching this happen in sort of slow motion. I know what happens next, and I see the head pop around the corner shortly after I make out the hand, and I am staring into just a completely black face of darkness, and I know it's staring right back at me, but as soon as it looked around the corner, it went back around, never to be seen again. I'm shaking at this point, but feeling like it was looking for someone specific and not finding them, like I wasn't who they were hoping to encounter. I really don't know, and granted, at this time I was living with people who unfortunately stayed within stagnant negative energy, and I cleansed myself as much as possible and tried not to engage in their constant stuff, but This isn't the first time that I've seen shadow people, but this is the first time that I've looked one in the face like that, and I absolutely do not recommend. So around 2007 to 2008, placing me around 5 years old, possibly 6, I was still in one of those transforming cribs, with a portion that could drop down and turn it into a toddler bed. This left the bed rather high off the floor, and at the time I lived in southern Arizona. Now, late in the night, or very early stages of the morning, one night, at around midnight to 3 o'clock, I was awoken by something grabbing at my ankle, feeling long sharp nails sort of digging in. Like stiletto-style nails from the now fragmented memories I still have of the night that this thing looked like a stereotypical witch. Wrinkled, wart-riddled face with a long nose and rotting teeth. It never spoke, but it did manage to pull me off the bed and under it. It startled me, understandably so, right? And it put a single finger up to its lips in the shushing motion. It never changed and simply vanished from the sight as the sun began to rise, and I guess I was just so freaked out that I never spoke about it, although my parents did find me under the bed in the morning. It wasn't some weird dream based on a memory, as at the time I wasn't a huge fan of any media with witches. It was a pretty hard set Lilo and Stitch kid already. Plus, when I got up in the morning, my parents also noticed that I had digging in marks in my skin where this witch had grabbed me. So, I've had many encounters throughout my life living by a graveyard. Literally, right on the other side of the property line is a graveyard. We've had spirits come in all the time, and once I watched them touch one of my dogs when the dog wasn't expecting it, freaking out. I saw a shadow, and then I told them to get out of here to be respectful of the dogs. I've also been seeing apparitions around the house lately, and feeling certain energies, I guess, but nothing dangerous. But we do have something that loves the dogs, and also is a bit of a prankster. Well, tonight I get home from the bar a lot earlier than usual. I go grab my pup to get her into the room. She usually goes right for the bed, and sometimes I'll grab some water or some sort of snack or whatever. I went to go and get a drink, and that was when I heard her growl. I felt someone in here when I got in, but I figured they'd get the hint to leave us because I don't give the most welcoming presence, I guess you could say. But my poor pup was so scared of this thing that they busted a window out of my hallway door and ran into the back room. Now, she knows she's in trouble for the window, and I know she scared herself a bit with that, but she was too scared to go back into that room, and I have never heard her growl like that either. And so, what type of protections can we put up around the yard to ward off any of these spirits? My family is Catholic. I'm a recovering Catholic, aka non-practicing, so they do their stuff, but I genuinely think that we need more. I don't want these things on my property scaring everything, especially the animals. Every single animal that we have is a rescue one and has come out of some pretty rough situations, and we're trying to lessen the stress, not make it worse. So, for some context, it was about 9:10 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time in regional Australia, and I was sitting on a tyre swing at a mate's house just looking down at the phone when I put it down to see a shadowy figure that looked 3D until a normal shadow sitting next to my friend's neighbour's car in their carport shelter. They were about twice the height of the car and completely pitch black. They had sort of Arby's mitten man sort of hands with two big fat arms and a skinny body. The head looked very round on the top and slimmed down at the mouth. The lights, they turned off, and I instantly went into fight or flight mode and ran back to their patio where I was completely out of breath and just sort of rattled down to my core. I tried telling people, and they say that no one was there and that you were imagining it. Mind you, I am mentally stable with no noticeable symptoms of anything in the schizophrenic disorders umbrella, and take no medication that led to hallucinations or anything. I'm an Aboriginal man, and shadow people in our culture are evil spirits who have come to kill you, because in the past it goes that they had fights with their ancestors, and they see you as the person to carry out all this legacy stuff on, so they try to harm you. I still don't know what it was, to be honest, and it was just, well, plain scary to see it. I moved in with my sister and her ex in a little renovated garage unit, made into a living room or kitchen area, a one-bed and bath in Berea, Kentucky. She told me that it was haunted, because she would hear footsteps and noises coming from the living room when no one was home but her. From the get-go, too, that place felt just off, I guess. Everyone always got the heavy feeling of being watched, everywhere else but the bedroom, that is, including the bathroom. One day, too, I told Henry that we didn't like when he stared at us, especially in the shower, and not to be a perv, that they only used the bedroom and the facilities when necessary, so there was no furniture in the living room. So when the neighbor gave me a couple of wooden chairs, I brought them over to the house. My sister, she didn't want them there, but I still just sort of sat them against the wall and went about my day. Well, the next time that I went into the living room, one of the chairs had been moved to the middle of the floor, underneath the ceiling fan. I asked if anyone had moved it, and she mouthed off, "I don't even want them here. Why would I fool with them?" So I just placed them back against the wall. And the next time that I went in there, it happened again. Now, we had heard rumors about a man hanging himself in there, and I suppose that just about sums it up, right? Also, one night my sister had her friend Matilda over, and we were all sitting on the bed in a triangle. Her friend and I were at the foot of the bed. We were just talking when I saw a quarter-sized black orb float from in front of the wall, up over the top of the blinds, and then disappear. The blinds were closed and it was nighttime, so it wasn't a headlight or anything. I stopped talking and said I just saw something, and Matilda said that she saw it too, and elaborated exactly what I had just seen. We also always had bad dreams there as well, and it was a weird place. On another occasion, I was spending the night with my friend Raspberry at her brother Michael's house. Their other brother Spaulding, her boyfriend Barney, and 2 cats were also there. It was around 11 p.m. when she broke out her glow-in-the-dark Ouija board with the light-up planchette, and we all head up to the upstairs to the closet, including the cats, leaving no one or nothing to debunk our experience that I'm about to tell you about. But we were all very serious about playing it, and wouldn't have goofed off at all. So we sit down, light a few candles, and we begin asking if there's anyone there who would like to speak to us. We get a yes and all look at each other. We play on asking random questions, and I remember the last question being, "Are you in the house?" "No," it reads. Then immediately after that, we hear a really loud bang downstairs. We sort of say bye, but I admit that it wasn't the best one, but we pushed the planchette to goodbye and burst out of the closet and down the stairs to find that the pan that we had used to make biscuits earlier, and obviously left out on the top of the stove, had been completely thrown across the room, now sitting in the living room of all places. Safe to say, our adrenaline was pumping for a while that night, because that was seriously one of the most incredible things that I had ever seen. Later that night too, it was just Michael and I playing another round on the Ouija board, and we asked the spirit, "Are you human?" and it said no. And that was when the scratching on the closet door began. Then banging and scratching as if something was desperately trying to get in. Like I said, we were all very serious about it and wouldn't have messed around. Besides, someone always fesses up to it at some point when they do play a prank like that. But in this case, no one ever did. We left the closet to find rather deep claw marks on it too, and that was the last time that I ever played on a Ouija board. This morning, I woke up as I normally did at around 6 a.m. I picked up my phone and started messaging my friends, and I was watching some videos as I normally did. Around 10 minutes in my peripheral vision, I then see a woman walk through my doorway. At first, I didn't bat an eye. I thought it was just my brain playing tricks on me, so I looked to its direction, and when I did, my heart dropped to my stomach. It didn't disappear. It was a woman, not a shadow figure, but a woman who I didn't recognize, who was very tall, around 50 years old as it looked, had long ginger curly hair, whose head was tilted sort of slightly, and who was just staring emotionlessly at me. I stared in utter paralyzing fear for what must have been around 3 seconds before I blinked and she was gone. At that point, I was frozen in bed, and my phone dropped on the floor for a solid minute before I sort of finally snapped out of it and threw my duvet off and sprinted down the stairs to wake up my parents like an 8-year-old. At that point, I was on the border of bursting in tears. My parents said that I was just tired, and they told me to go back upstairs. It was only later that morning that they actually took me seriously. It's also important to mention that at that time, I was not tired and was for sure not dreaming or daydreaming or anything. So are there any possible explanations for this? Am I going crazy? Please do let me know so that I can stop thinking about this, as I'm pretty shaken up. Also, after some research, I did discover that the previous owner of this home had passed away at the age of 67, and it turns out that the woman was quite tall, had long ginger curly hair, and stayed in this home for 24 years. The images that I saw of this woman, they pretty much matched perfectly with what I remember seeing. What really creeps me out though about this is that what I saw was a full human, not any sort of ghostly or shadowy figure. It was probably the woman's lost spirit or whatever walking around the home, but I actually saw her, a full-body apparition like that. It's terrifying to go through something like this, and if you have any advice as to what I can do about it, then please do let me know. I, a 19-year-old female, have been with my boyfriend, 21 and male, over 4 years now. Throughout our relationship, he told me that he keeps experiencing sleep paralysis, and that it became more and more frequent. He had maybe 1 or 2 the first 3 years, but last year, they definitely kept getting worse. We're both students, and for the past 2 years he's been living in a rented apartment with a good friend of his. Sometimes I spend the night there as well. And one time in May, he told me that he experienced sleep paralysis again, and that he was aware and awake but wasn't able to move or say anything, like his lips were sort of glued together. He said that he tried to scream my name to wake me up so that I could help him, but nothing ever came out of his mouth. He also mentioned that he kept seeing in one of the corners of the room a huge black shadow that made him feel nauseous, and he eventually got out of it and went back to bed. Now, the next day I was still there. He asked me to stay with him in case something happened again, because he starts to get a bit scared by it. I tried to stay awake in case something happened, but I think I immediately fell asleep, which is just like me. Hey, don't judge, I'm weak like that, but this is how I was woken up in the middle of the night. So I heard some sounds and I immediately opened my eyes. And he was my boyfriend, laying on the side with his back at me, resting his head on one hand and saying random stuff in a language that I have never heard before, looking at the exact same corner that he mentioned about when he had the sleep paralysis. I could have swore too that I saw something moving in the corner almost. But the weirdest thing is that it seemed like he was having an actual conversation. He would talk and then stop, like as if somebody was answering, and then he would talk again and so on and so forth. I was like, what the heck is he doing, and called his name. He immediately stopped talking, and then the heaviest silence filled the room for what seemed like an eternity. Then he started hysterically laughing for a few seconds, and then just passed out of nowhere. I checked to see if he was okay, and he started snoring, so at least I knew he fell back to sleep. I wasn't able to sleep that night. I turned around and cried until I saw the light outside. The next day I told him about it, and he apologized for scaring me. I said that it wasn't his fault, but it was clear that he felt bad. We asked his friend if he had heard anything, and he said no, which made me feel like maybe I was just dreaming. But then he added that he woke up as well that night but wasn't able to move. Felt like he couldn't breathe, and claiming that he saw the weirdest shadow in the corner of his room. The apartment, it is consecrated, but I always feel uneasy being there. Another thing I'll add to, although I don't know if it's important or not, but my boyfriend's roommate has nightmares pretty often as well, and would wake up screaming every time. If you've listened to me this long, then thank you. I've always loved paranormal stories and activities and creepy stuff like these, and I was pretty excited to share these with you. Although I will admit that it is another thing altogether to experience it yourself. The bedroom that I used to have for most of my life, living with my parents, has had quite an extensive lot of bizarre or unexplained happenings. The most puzzling, though, is that it seems to be causing sleep paralysis in whoever sleeps there. Note that all smoke or gas detectors of the house have always been functional. The house has no gas line or indoor garage, doesn't have mold or other toxic things or hallucinogens. I and anyone else mentioned here have no history of mental illness or other health conditions, anything susceptible of causing such things as well. None of us take any medication with no such side effects, don't use any drugs, and was not at any point under the influence of alcohol or other substances. In other words, I've racked my brain over everything that could have been causing this, and there just really isn't anything that can explain it. Anyways, I first noticed the phenomenon when I was a young teen. It didn't happen very often at first, but as I grew older, it happened more often, up to every other night. I would wake up, usually at night or early morning, fully unable to move. I couldn't talk, couldn't move my eyes even, and the harder that I tried to move, the more it felt like my body was, like vibrating or buzzing, with proportionally louder rumbling noise in my ears. I have tinnitus, and this definitely wasn't that. For the longest time, I wouldn't fight it and just let myself fall back to sleep. I learned about sleep paralysis when I was about 17 or 18 because of this, and it seemed like a good enough scientific explanation for me. That was until I moved to another bedroom inside the same house. You see, at age 21, we decided to move my bed to my father's previous bedroom in the basement, and I instantly stopped having those sleep paralysis episodes. I think that's when I realized that these weren't as normal as I thought that they were. I mean, if I did suffer from the condition, it wouldn't matter where I slept, wouldn't it? In fact, I never had one single episode anywhere other than that one in that specific bedroom. Not once in any other room in the same house even. Not once in any other room that I've had since moving out, in any of my previous apartments, nor in my current house. It's been almost 15 years since, and yet to this day, if I happen to try and take a nap in that specific bedroom when I'm visiting my parents, half of the time it will cause sleep paralysis. It also doesn't matter what time of day or night it is. I've even had it happen in broad daylight just last week. And it's gotten worse too. I don't even need to be near sleep. Sometimes all it takes is for me to just close my eyes and the paralysis hits instantly, but always only in that one specific room and nowhere else. My mum now sleeps in that room, I've told her several times about these experiences, and she always avoids the subject. I also told my significant other. He decided too that he would like to try and take a nap in that room out of curiosity. He has never had a single episode of sleep paralysis in his entire life, mind you, and did not even know it existed until I told him about it. But a few weeks ago, he had the opportunity to try it. He said that he felt observed the moment that he stepped into that room, but brushed the feeling off. And yes, he did experience paralysis for the first time ever, right there in that room. He couldn't sleep at all, and it only went away suddenly when I walked past the bedroom door on my way to the bathroom. He shot up and left the room, visibly shaken, and thanked me for passing by, saying that he felt really trapped and couldn't seem to break free. Now, this guy sleeps like a snoring dead log. It takes a lot of noise to wake him up, and me just walking by really shouldn't have been enough. So I know for a fact that he wasn't asleep. He also has taken naps at my parents' house before, though not in that one room, and never had any other issues either. I don't know what it is about that room, but there just seems to be something really off. To start this off, I'm 21 and a single mum to a beautiful 9-month-old. I live in a granny flat at the back of my parents' property. The previous tenants were the previous owner's daughter and 2 granddaughters. Apparently the daughter, a single mum, often had a fleeting relationship that would move in and out of the flat as well. And when I moved in last year, September, I was still pregnant. The very first night, something watched me while I slept too, I'm sure of it. I could see it, but I couldn't really feel its presence, I guess. My cat wouldn't stop staring in the direction of the door as well. And now, I didn't know this, but there's a motion sensor light in one of the top corners of my room, apparently, facing the door. The reason I didn't know this is because it would turn on and stay on, even when neither I nor my cat were moving. This happened again the next afternoon, and I asked my mum to bless my house, as that was normally something that we do when we would move into a new house or weird stuff happens anyway. After my mum blessed my place, things were fine again until October, when I started seeing shadow people in my parents' house. I could see and feel them watching me, and I felt that they were angry that I ignored them. Like, I don't know how I got to that conclusion, but it's just the way that I felt. After my daughter was born, my mother blessed the flat again, and everything felt fine again. But whenever anyone comes into my flat, they always say that they feel like they're not alone, that something is watching them and that it is angry. And this all brings me to the past 3 months when my baby started with what we thought was sleep regression. She would wake up screaming bloody murder like she was hurt, and wouldn't fall back asleep unless I held her and went to go sleep on the couch in the TV room with her. I am at this point exhausted, frustrated, and I often find myself getting extremely angry, to the point where I walk away and have to just scream somewhere, which I can't help but feel ashamed about. I recently started dating again as well, and my boyfriend comes to sleep over on the weekends. He has an amazing relationship with my daughter and treats her like his own. When he's over, it feels like the things that are in my flat are somewhat appeased, I guess. My daughter doesn't wake up at all as well, and every night that my boyfriend leaves, she's a scream machine again. She hasn't known him for long at all and isn't very attached to him or anything either, so that strikes out the possibility of missing him, as well as the fact that this happens Sunday to Thursday every night. My mum and I loosely theorized that this thing in my house was created by some residual energy from the previous single mum. I have heard that there's a name for that kind of entity, but I can't remember what the name of it is. Other things I've experienced too are something calling my nickname, and when I go looking, nobody is ever there. Foul smells that are honestly just horrible. Things just go missing and reappear in weird places, mostly religious stuff as well. Knocks all over the place. I forgot to add too that when I pick my daughter up from her cot, which is right next to my bed, she starts looking around like frantically and hyperventilates for like minutes afterward. So, if you've experienced anything like this and know of what I can do about it without actually contacting whatever is in this place, then please do let me know, because sincerely, I am a drained, tired mother and I need some help. I had a friend in middle school, early 2000s, whose family lived in a very large home that was a bed and breakfast in the late 1800s to early 1900s. In the Prohibition era, the house had a ballroom or a sort of bar thing on the second floor that was only accessible through a waist-high door in the closet that had to be crawled through. Unfortunately, there was a fire in the ballroom, and due to the small door, many didn't make it out alive. The door inside the closet that led to the ballroom still exists, and I've seen it, but behind the door is now just drywall and the exterior of the home. I encountered things in this house often. My friend would mention that the spirits were most active while I was there too. We would hear or feel things often, footsteps descending the stairs when nobody was home, a sudden cool of rush air when no windows were open, etc. There was even one room in the house that her dog just refused to go inside of, which was a bit weird. But the most intense experience that I had in this house is a distinct memory that sticks with me still, 15 years later. So my friend and I were in her bedroom, getting ready for our track meet. This was broad daylight, around 3 p.m. We were doing our hair looking into a mirror, and the bedroom door was behind me and to my right, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and when I turned, I swear to you that I saw a woman with her hair slicked back into a low bun, wearing a pink sort of puffy sleeved gown. She was peering around the corner at us from the door, and looked surprised when I saw her, eyes wide but curious. She was pale and sort of opaque, and at the sight of her I screamed and jumped onto my friend, and when I looked back, the woman was gone. When I finally calmed down and explained to my friend what I had seen, she went pale and explained that a few nights prior, while she was washing her face in the bathroom, she reached for her hand towel and saw a pink blur rush along the open doorway when she opened her eyes. She wasn't totally sure that the event was related, but the fact that I had seen something and she had us both a bit creeped out. This experience is the one that solidified my belief in the afterlife, actually, ghosts and the paranormal. It's something that I just cannot forget. In 1991, my mother was killed in a tragic auto pedestrian accident. Funeral arrangements were made, family gathered in the city where she lived, and we all returned home and carried on. About a month later, I was sleeping at home when the phone rang, about 3 a.m. I had to get up to answer it, as the only phone was in the kitchen. There was a lot of static on the line, and then, amazingly, I heard my mother's voice. She had a very distinctive voice. She sounded like Lucille Ball, so I could tell who it was immediately. I was so shocked I just couldn't make any sense of it. I remember that I said, "Mother, where are you?" All kinds of things were going through my mind. Was there maybe a case of mistaken identity? Was she not dead, but maybe just hurt instead, and couldn't remember anything? She seemed very confused and sort of frustrated. Wouldn't answer any of my questions, but kept saying that she had to find June. She had lived on a road called Lake June Road, so I thought that that was what she meant. I was frantically trying to get her to say where she was, telling her that I wanted to help her, but after mentioning June a couple of more times, there was more static, and then the line went dead. I sat in the dark for a long time, wondering what to do and what the heck had just happened, and if possibly I'd imagined the whole thing. Finally, it was time to go to work, and I got ready and went. When I got to work, my dear friend and co-worker were a little bit late that morning too. When she arrived, she told me that she had a really bad night, and I said, "Tell me about it, you and me both." Then my face went white and my hair stood on end as she told me, "Yeah, last night at about 3, my Aunt June passed away." This happened many years ago now when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I wouldn't describe the area that I was in as backwoods necessarily, but it was a wooded 100-plus acre ranch. The land is in the southwest part of the United States. My family owns the property, and we have family reunions every year and all stay for about 5 days to camp. There's an area of the ranch too where we all set up camp and cook and eat. Getting to that part of the ranch requires driving through a small village and several gates for about 2 miles. The first gate beyond the village is slightly past a set of railroad tracks. And while that's a bit of a description, I admit, it is relevant later in the story. Now, because I had been camping at the ranch for as long as I really could remember, and the land was private, my parents would allow me to go off on my own during the day, as long as I didn't go too far. I'd spend time walking the property near our camp area, looking for arrowheads or trying to catch tadpoles in the ponds, stuff like that. On this day, I left the large camp area after lunch, which was around 11:30, and told my mum that I was going to a nearby creek. I planned on catching some tadpoles to bring back to the camp and be back on time for a swimming trip my cousins were planning. They wanted to go to a nearby river, and I really didn't want to miss it. I made it down to the creek and got several tadpoles. I probably spent a total of 15 minutes down there, I would guess. To get back to camp, I would have needed to either climb up a relatively steep embankment with a lot of loose rock or circle around on a longer route with a flat trail. I would usually go up the embankment, but I didn't have a top for the water bottle that I caught the tadpoles with, and I didn't want to risk slipping and spilling them out and killing them. I had never walked the longer trail by myself, mind you, but I had with my dad and felt confident that I could find my way back to the camp. Anyway, as I walked back to the camp, I had my head down just looking for arrowheads in the washed out areas of the trail, when I started feeling a little creeped out as I continued walking. We all know that feeling like someone is watching you. It was unsettling, but I chalked it up to just getting spooked or being on a trail by myself or whatever. Now, the next part I cannot explain, because it's as if a light switch just turned on or someone snapped their fingers and I came back to reality. Except when I came to, I was no longer on the trail that I had been on before. I was now near the railroad tracks and it was completely dark. My mum was standing in front of me, shaking my shoulders and yelling, "Where were you?" 2 things I remember really clearly about the moment I came to are, 1, the look of fear, anger, relief in my mum's tearful eyes as she was yelling at me, and 2, the confusion that I felt about what the heck was going on. I mean, the last thing I remembered was just walking on the trail back to the camp, and now suddenly it was dark and I was at the railroad tracks leading to the ranch, which was over 2 miles away. The best that I can describe it is to compare it to the movie The Butterfly Effect. The main character would be living in one moment, then suddenly he'd just wake up somewhere entirely different. In any case, my parents drove me back to the camp and I learned that it was 10:30 p.m. This meant that I'd been gone for 11 hours, about 10 and a half of which I cannot account for to this day. My parents and all of my family had understandably freaked out when I hadn't returned to the camp. They had been looking for me all day. I was a really good kid though growing up and almost never broke any rules, so my parents were baffled at my behavior that day. I tried to explain to them that I really had no memory of getting to the tracks, but they didn't believe me. They thought maybe I just got lost and was too embarrassed to admit it. This was the only time that I've ever experienced something like this, and I cannot explain just how unsettling it is to not be able to account for all of those hours that I was gone. Was it coincidence that I had that sort of creeped out feeling on the trail and then just lost 10.5 hours of my life like that? I wish I had answers for what happened, but honestly, I really don't know if I ever will. Which is why I'm here. Have any of you ever had anything similar happen? And if you have, then I would love to hear it. This happened to me when I was 17 years old. I was just about to graduate high school. I was homeschooled and very encouraged to pursue entrepreneurship. I was trying to establish a photography business that I could run after graduating. In order to build my portfolio, I decided to ask a few friends and acquaintances to model for me. I asked a girl I worked with if she and her husband would like to model a couple of sessions for me. It would be a win-win since they would receive free photos anyway, and I would get to add them to my website as sample work. So we planned a day to meet, and I asked them to meet at a local park one evening. Something you should know too about this park is that it is pretty far out in the country. The park has soccer fields, baseball fields, a golf course, and walking trails, so it is on a large plot of land and fairly secluded. The only house in view of the park is the caretaker's home directly across the street from the entrance. And unless there is an event or a weekend, there is usually not many people there. I felt pretty confident meeting the couple there because I was only planning to arrive about 15 minutes early to set up anyway, so I wouldn't be alone long anyway. Now, the park has an entrance where you can drive down a road into the parking lot to get to all the sports fields, playground, and down to the pond as well. The front of the park has a large grassy strip, which is where I was planning to set up for the photos. I bypassed the entrance and pulled into a little dirt section at the front of the park and began unloading all of my props. I was always taught to be a cautious person, especially as a young woman, so I took a quick glance to see if anyone was at the park. I saw one car in the parking lot and two guys tossing a baseball in the baseball field, along with their pit bull. Across the street, I could see the caretaker out in her yard, so that made me feel a lot better. I decided that I would just keep an eye out and continued setting up my things. I would glance up every now and then to make sure that the two men were still on the baseball field. And I really had no reason to believe that they would bother me, but something in my gut just told me to keep watch. The couple that I was waiting on seemed to be running late. I finished my setup and glanced up to check on the two guys, and to my horror, they were gone. The car was still there, but the men and the dog were nowhere in sight. There was a bit of a hill in front of me that blocked some of the park entrance from sight, so I thought maybe they had just decided to walk one of the nature trails or whatever. But again, that feeling in my gut just told me that something was wrong. I looked at the caretaker's house and she had gone back inside. I couldn't get everything back into the car quickly, so I just grabbed my camera equipment and hopped into my car. I locked the doors, turned on the ignition, and got my phone out. And literally, as soon as I got settled in my car, I see the two guys coming over the hill with their dog. I feel my gut feeling melt into panic. You have to understand that there is no reason for them to come up where I was. It's literally just an open grassy field. If the dog needed to relieve himself, then there was plenty of space for that at the edges of the wood, or the nature trail, or the walk to the pond, all of which were way closer to them than where I was. But they walked around my setup, and when they got to my car, one guy went around the front, and the one holding the dog on the leash circled my car. I assumed that they had realized that I had already noticed that they were coming, and that I was no longer vulnerable, because they rejoined and walked further down, up, and around the soccer field. Once I felt that I was no longer in danger, I glanced down at my phone to see that the couple that I was supposed to meet had apparently forgotten about it and were at the beach. I was so fed up at that point that I jumped out of the car, grabbed all of my props, and just shoved them in. This was my first experience of how scary it can be to be a woman out there alone like this. I've had some other experiences since then, but this one always sticks out to me the most because I am absolutely certain that those guys intended to do me harm. And what kind of match would a 17-year-old girl be against 2 grown men and a pit bull? One thing is for certain though, I will never go back to that park alone. When I was in school, about 15 years ago, a group of friends and I were hanging out at our friend Dale's house. We lived way out in the country, also technically part of Appalachia, and the kind of middle of nowhere where the nearest neighbours are a few miles up the road. Dale happened to have a cave near his property that we liked to explore and be dumb teenagers in. To get to the cave, you had to walk roughly a mile through dense woods and cross a big field. We had yet to find the end of the cave system, despite exploring for hours at a time multiple times. And one day we had spent the better part of the afternoon exploring the caves, and it had gotten dark by the time that we emerged. We already had flashlights, so that was no big deal. My memory is a little bit fuzzy on the exact details, but for some reason our friend Sam decided to go back to the house a little earlier. I want to say that he ordered pizza or something and he went to meet the driver or something like that. But the rest of us started making our way back through the woods to Dale's house when we started hearing voices in the woods. We were asking each other if we heard that and where it was coming from, but we each had a different direction of where we thought that it was coming from. Whatever it was a childlike voice, and it sounded like talking or whispering, but you really couldn't make out what was being said. At this point, we thought one of our friends was messing with us and started to talk back to it. It sounded like a child giggling though, and then our flashlights started to flicker and die as well. We now had one dim light left to get the rest of the way back. We were all thoroughly freaked out, prank or not, and hightailed it back to the house, adrenaline pumping. We all got into the house, shut the door, and I felt a sense of safety for a split second before the crucifix on the wall literally came off the wall and broke on the floor. It seems like something out of a bad horror movie, I know, but we all watched it legitimately come off the wall and crash to the ground for no apparent reason. Before that moment, I hadn't been convinced that it wasn't our other friend Sam that was messing with us, even though he really wasn't the type. We all started word vomiting at Sam, trying to explain what had just happened and question if he had something to do with it. But he genuinely seemed freaked out and confused. He actually said that on his way back to the house earlier, he kept hearing weird things and seeing lights in the woods, and he thought it was us trying to play a prank on him. To this day, I still don't know what it was. And sure, maybe our friend is a great actor, but I honestly don't think that it was a prank. The feeling that I got in the woods, like every hair standing on end, goosebumps on goosebumps, and every fiber of my being screaming to run, I've never felt that again, even with pranks, and never want to. This happened a few weeks ago, and it was so bizarre that I still think about it every so often. I was babysitting my nieces, 8 and 10, since my sister was going out to meet this other girl at a coffee shop. I offered to babysit my nieces since her house was nice, and I didn't have anything else to do that night, so I decided why not. At first, we just watched movies and played video games together. Later on into the night, I noticed they didn't eat anything, and so I asked them if they were hungry. They both replied no at first. That's when I said that I can make a quesadilla for them, or anything else they want. They still replied no. When I mentioned pizza, they immediately yelled yes. Of course they would. And well, that was a bad idea that night. When I called the local Pizza Hut, I ordered 2 large pizzas to be delivered. Keep in mind that I went outside to make this phone call, quite loudly I should say, because it was dead silent outside as well. I only went outside because I noticed a bag on the street, and I thought that it was mine or somebody else's. It was just trash when I looked closely at it. I'm assuming that this was the neighbor's trash bag. Anyway, 20 minutes go by and I hear a doorbell ring. It was the Pizza Hut delivery girl. I paid her in cash and I took the pizzas to the kitchen where my nieces were eating at. And this is when the weird stuff happens. You see, not even 10 minutes go by and I hear the doorbell again. I was skeptical at first and looked out the window. It was hard to see much of anything by this point. I opened the door, only to be greeted by an old man with a pizza box in his hand. He says to me, "Hello, son, I got your pizza that you ordered." I tried to answer in a way that would divert the situation. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't order any pizza. You must have got the wrong location." That's when I tried to close the door, but he pushed his hand on the door, hard. "Are you sure?" he replied. I firmly replied back, "Yes," and I closed the door. I thought that was the end of that, until one of my nieces told me, "Why is there a man just standing outside of our house?" I was confused, but my heart started to pound when I thought that it was the same old man from earlier. And I was right. It was the same old man, still standing outside the house with the pizza box still in his hand. I was absolutely livid. I opened the door furiously and yelled at him that I would call the cops immediately. He ran off at that. My sister arrived 2 hours later and I told her of what happened. She looked immediately concerned and then asked who it was. I told her that it was an old man who impersonated a pizza delivery worker. I don't know what she did after I told her. I'm not sure if she called the cops to file a report or not. But what I do know is that it is a night I won't be forgetting quickly. I never really tell anyone about this story, but hearing all the stories here, I feel like I should share it. Because of this, I don't go on walks alone or even with friends, unless it's in a very public place. But even then, I still am paranoid, I admit. With that being said, my friend's family had just moved to a new town 15 minutes from where I lived. It was a complete ghost town, with one tiny grocery store, a post office, and a school. This town was so secluded and quiet that I rarely ever saw cars drive by. One night, though, as we were unpacking boxes, we heard a knock at the door. It was a big, tall guy with a shotgun in his hands. Being from Oklahoma, this could mean that you're either meeting your hick new neighbor, or it's actually someone wanting to harm us. Turns out it was just a hick neighbor coming in to introduce himself. He told my friend's mum about the lack of police and how everyone tends to carry their own guns in order to protect themselves, because the police were usually no help and 15 minutes away anyway. He also talked about how these areas can be dangerous and that my friend's mum should keep a gun with her. At this time, I was 13 years old, and knowing this information, you would think that I would simply stay my butt inside and not wander the streets of this dangerous hillbilly ghost town. But I did. There was no service, no cable, and nothing to do but go outside. We would walk to the store and get snacks, walk to the school and play on the playground. Majority of the time we wouldn't see a single car or person, but the same clerk in the grocery store on every walk that we took. Now, there was a day that my dad had brought me to her house, and right off the bat we walked to the park. That day I was sick to my stomach, but was eager to go and see my friend, so I went anyways. I had a terrible feeling for some reason, and now that I'm older and have experienced bad anxiety, I can now say that that day I was experiencing some pretty bad anxiety and didn't know why I felt this way. When we got there, we had actually ended up hanging out with an old friend who had transferred to this school a year prior. After he left, we sat on the bench for what felt like ages, taking selfies and just talking. When all of a sudden, the stereotypical creepy van pulls up to the park. Now, my friend was and still is way braver than I was, and will ever be, and she is always the daredevil type, but for some reason, around this time, I just assumed it was a family coming to play, and my anxiety wasn't there. But my friend was scared, and she immediately had a bad feeling when the van pulled up, and I could tell that she was ready to leave. In the end, though, we decided to stay and see who it was before we just ran off. Of course, like something out of a movie, came out two big men, literally barreling over to where we were. We immediately started to run away, and they tried to follow and grab us. They got back into the van eventually and followed us. I have no idea how too, but they didn't catch up to us, but we just ran as fast as we could up the road and straight to the grocery store. I was horrified when we got inside and I couldn't even speak. That sick feeling that I felt on the way to my friend's house made complete sense now. My mum was always watching true crime growing up, and sometimes she would have me watch it with her, so I was always really scared to walk around because of that. But even with that fear, I never thought that it would actually happen to me. The van was parked across the street, but eventually it drove off. We walked home with no way to call anyone, thinking that they could be waiting for us around every corner with absolutely nobody around. It was and still is the scariest day that I've had. I didn't tell anyone for years, which was stupid of me, I know, but at 13 years old, I didn't know what to do. I'm turning 21 soon, and this story still keeps me up at night sometimes. I can't help but imagine what would have happened if they had actually captured me and my friend, where we would have gone, and what would have happened to us. My grandparents owned about 20 acres of land in central Missouri, and throughout my childhood, my parents would send me to stay with them. The house that they lived in was very old. There was also a local legend that the guy who originally built it ritualistically killed his daughter and wife. In exchange, the devil supposedly gave him two magic rings. One allowed him to transform into a massive wolf, and the other allowed him to become a bear. My grandpa always loved to tell me that story just to freak me out, and quite honestly, none of us really ever believed it. But one night when I was about 10, my grandparents left me alone in the house to go and play poker at a friend's. And it was around 10 p.m. when I began hearing howling circling the house. I was panicking, but then I heard scratching on the front door. Slow, methodical scratching. Not like it was trying to get in, but like it was doing it to intimidate me. The howling started to sound to me human around then as well, like somebody was yelling. Completely freaked out, I ran upstairs and hid under my bed. Eventually, the noises all stopped and I went to the window to look outside. In the moonlight, I saw a massive wolf standing in the front yard. It locked eyes with me and then it stood up on its back legs. I screamed at that and was crying. I hid under my bed until my grandparents got back hours later. Surprisingly too, they actually believed me because there were really large scratch marks on the front door. But weirdly, the marks started above the door. So high up, the one who carved them would have had to have been at least 8 feet tall. Now, I don't know if any of this is just coincidence or not, but the fact that I knew about that story and then this happened to me, I really don't know what to think. So this was May of 2017. My husband Jim and I, we own a 5-floor, 100-year-old building, which has our business in it, an antique mall, our apartment upstairs, and various other tenants. We'd had several back-to-back burglaries in prior years, and had reinforced the front doors of the business pretty intensely. Aggressive steel bars, more cameras, etc. But anyway, at 3 a.m. we were sound asleep upstairs, as one is, but then we got a call from our security company. We had a motion detection in an unusual location, not the main floor where 90% of the jewelry is, but downstairs. That sort of thing is usually just a spider on the camera, or a mouse or something like that. So we ran out less than prepared. I was only wearing a tank top, undies and flip-flops. Jim did not grab his baseball bat, but at least had pants on. I went one way to check the front door, which was intact, and Jim went the other to check around back. Suddenly, though, he called me and said, "Somebody's inside." So I fumbled with my phone, trying to call 911. In that situation, your monkey brain is just in the driver's seat, and the phone is the black monolith from 2001. Finally, though, I managed it and rounded the backside of the building, narrating to the 911 operator. Broken glass, broken window. I said too, as I later heard during the run-up to the trial, "Oh my goodness, they're in there, please come now." Then there was an unholy crash. It sounded like everything inside was being smashed to bits, and the feeling of listening to someone busy destroying your livelihood is something that I cannot quite capture. Who was in there? How many? What path of destruction was being wreaked? I could only yell down the phone at a faceless voice begging for help that I knew was still minutes away. Bear in mind, I was freshly woken into a horrible situation, barely clothed, and it was escalating by the second. As it turned out, the burglar, Troy, had come face to face with Jim, trying to exit the building out of the broken window before I'd arrived. They locked eyes and Troy reversed direction back to the depths of the building. Then he dropped his backpack with stolen merch, flung himself bodily over a giant iron gate, smashed through the restaurant tenant's door, and then subsequently out their main door. At that point, he had caught a lot of glass to the face and body and was bleeding pretty badly. Jim caught him on the exit and pounced on him, full body slam to the cement. Then he pinned Troy. Adrenaline is wild. I wasn't crying, but urgently begging the operator to hurry. I was terrified that I was going to see my husband die before my eyes. And then I ran right into the fray because, again, adrenaline. It just gets right up on you, and you just do the stupidest stuff when high on adrenaline like that. They were in the middle of the street though, dimly orange lit by the streetlights, and it was hard to pass what was going on. Thank the Lord though that Troy did not have a weapon and was wildly unprepared to have a madman tackle him in the dark. As it turned out, he had done hundreds of burglaries and never been caught. Jim had the upper hand and had him fully pinned down, and Troy was wisely playing possum. Suddenly though, we heard a roaring engine and someone laying rubber. Apparently, I started screaming, and yes, it was Troy's getaway driver, his wife Kelsey. She leaned out of her window and yelled, "Get off of him, I'm going to kill you," clearly captured on the audio, but I don't remember it. Not willing to wait, she then tried to run me over. I vaguely remember realizing things were going horribly wrong, but desperately trying to read the license plate onto the phone with an idiotic laser's focus. It was out of state and I struggled to read it, and that was pretty much it. My brain deleted how close she had come to turning me into My brain deleted just how close she had come to turning me into a bloody smear, within maybe a foot of me, I guess, fast, while I dodged like a badly clothed matador clutching my phone. We had to listen to the 911 recording a year later in the persecutor's office, synced with the video. The video was from a nearby business with really good exterior cameras. Jim started crying and he had no idea what a close call it was. The engine revving overwhelmed my screaming at a certain point. My voice was blown out. I was trying to chant the license number like an incantation, but you cannot hear it because the engine roar and the squealing tires were so loud. Jim let Troy go, of course. Troy jumped into the car and they tore off down the street. The police showed up a minute later, but they were gone by that point. Anyway, Troy had bled all over Jim from the door glass. Jim freaked out so hard later. We figured Troy was likely using IV drugs, correctly as it turned out, and I had to inspect Jim for cuts using a flashlight to make sure I missed nothing. He still got tested though. Unlike a number of other incidences, this one was taken pretty seriously due to the amount of evidence as well as violence and, the attempted murder and all that. Several months later, they arrested Troy and Kelsey. They had Troy's DNA from the bloody clothes Jim was wearing and all over the car that they'd been driving, which had been stolen but ditched. It turned out they were wanted in 5 counties for hundreds of commercial burglaries over several years to support their oxy habits, back before the age of Fetty. But we were the only mess-up that they had made, They apparently didn't know that we lived on the premises. Kelsey, the wife, flipped on Troy. They accepted a plea for her, much to my displeasure since she was the one that tried to kill me. But at least she ratted him out 6 ways to Sunday. He refused a plea. He wanted a trial. I would not wish a trial on my worst enemy, though. You get interviewed alone by the defense team, and did you know that they can lie? They sure can. They won't in front of the jury, but one-on-one they'll eat your soul and pick your teeth with the shards. You don't get a lawyer too, you're on team prosecution. Theoretically I can understand it, but it is utterly maddening. They took me first. They played the 911 tape, second time I'd heard it. They insisted that because I kept saying they're inside, that I was lying and that there was somebody else, not Troy or Kelsey. That I hadn't yet seen the person, so they were a they, which is what I told them adamantly. Then they took Jim, and they told Jim that I admitted that I'd lied, and there was another person inside the building. He luckily laughed and was like, absolutely not, she didn't. Finally, the day before trial, Troy accepted a plea, thank the Lord. I had been having the stupidest meltdown ever. Do I dye my hair something other than purple? I just spent $700 on it. What shoes do I wear? I don't have conservative shoes. How can I cover my tattoos? Basically, the most pointless stuff that I could control because that train was rolling on without me. Kelsey got off with probation. Troy was in prison from 2017 to 2020 until he got released early, adjacent to COVID. Kelsey seems to be clean and living a normal life now, remarried with kids, and she actually looks happy. I watch her on Facebook sometimes, and I do occasionally wish that she was a raging case of hemorrhoids or something, though. I guess I'm just not a saint. This story took place in 2020 when I was 18 years old. I lived in a relatively safe neighborhood, but my country does have a high crime rate in general, so take that with a pinch of salt, I guess. My dad, he had passed away earlier in the year, and I had no siblings, so my mum and I lived alone in our house. The COVID lockdowns were still in place as well, but as certain restrictions were lifted, people were starting to return to work. Between my house and the train tracks was a stretch of empty field. It became a safe, quiet space for me to escape to whenever I needed to get out of the house. I would normally sit there once a day for a cigarette or two, sometimes for a little picnic. My home situation was complicated, I guess, to say the least, and due to the pandemic, I really had nowhere else to go. On this particular day, I went there for a few minutes to smoke, as always. I was about halfway through my cigarette when I noticed a young man walking along the train tracks on the other side of the field. He was barefoot and wearing dirty, worn-out clothes. He noticed me and made a hand gesture suggesting that he was asking for a smoke. I should have just left, but as a teenager, I found it difficult to say no to people. I walked across the field and handed him a smoke. He took it from me, and I immediately felt uneasy with the way that he was looking at me. He asked me, "Don't you live in that house over there?" and pointed at my house. I avoided answering the question, and at this point realized that I needed to leave. I had left from my front gate that day, and for him to know where I lived, he must have watched me leave from the back gate before. I told him that I needed to get going. He started insisting on giving me a hug to say thank you, and I declined several times. At this point, I turned around and started walking away quickly, but I didn't get very far. You see, he caught up to me and put his arm around my waist. At that, I panicked, not knowing what to do. All I could think of was that I needed to get away. As I tried to start running, he grabbed me from behind and started dragging me toward the row of houses where the views from the road is completely blocked. The fences were high too, so no one could see the field from their backyards. We were completely isolated, in other words. I was kicking and struggling, desperate to get out of his grasp. he ended up throwing me on the ground with him on top of me, still holding on. In a split second, my life flashed before my eyes too. That feeling that something terrible was about to happen came over me. I couldn't escape, he was too strong. My arms were trapped by his and he was holding me down, so I couldn't kick him. So I did the only thing left to do. I started screaming for help. Suddenly, I was free. I could move. He had let go and jumped off of me. He ran away, and my heart was still pounding. I was shaking in shock from what had just happened. He disappeared into the industrial area on the other side of the train tracks. I immediately ran towards the road, and as I reached it, I noticed that it was empty. There were no cars parked in my neighbors' driveways, no one heard me screaming, and had he realized that day could have had a far worse ending. He knew where I lived, and I was terrified of him returning, obviously. For months I had panic attacks and nightmares, and I could barely leave my house without breaking down. I moved away from there a year later, but I still sometimes get scared when I'm home alone or walking around town. Thankfully, I never saw him again, and I really hope that I never will. So, this morning around 4 a.m., I woke up, which is very unusual of me to wake up this early, and saw a large, I'd say about 7 foot tall, looking figure in front of my mirror looking at me. For reference, my bed is on the side of my wall, and next to it is my mirror and makeup cart. But this figure seemed to be staring directly at me, but when I turned on my lamp, that's next to my bed, it basically just evaporated and disappeared. Sharing this makes me doubt myself, but I honestly know what I saw. It's been giving me a lot of anxiety, and I just wanted to know if this is anything that I should look into, or if anyone knows anything about something like this. It spooked me pretty bad, and I wasn't able to go back to sleep. I 110% believe in paranormal activity, ghosts, etc., and so this gave me an extra spook. To add on to this as well, I stay home by myself a good amount of the time, and I've also been hearing tapping in the walls, bumps downstairs. Sometimes I'll hear the occasionally shuffling sound down the hallway. I looked it up but didn't get many answers, so this is my last resort to try and see if anyone can help me out. Oh, and also I feel I should mention that in my house we turn on the heat when we go to sleep, and my room ends up being pretty hot because it's upstairs, and when I woke up, I was shaking because of just how cold I was. This is very unusual because, if I'm being honest, I usually wake up sweating a bit. I was the last one to fall asleep, and when my house is asleep, we're dead asleep, so no one really would have turned the AC on. This morning as well, the same thing happened. I woke up at around 4. I woke up facing my wall, so I turned over to check the time on the phone, and I saw the exact same figure standing in the same spot. I had the blanket over my mirror, and I thought that would help, but it didn't seem to. I'm getting pretty worried though, and I'm thinking that I should probably do a cleanse of my room or even my house. But again, if you have any better ideas, then please do share. I'm an American, and me and my ex were traveling down a simple highway in the countryside of Scotland. The highway that we were on, A82 I believe, was situated in between Loch Ness and a forest. It was a narrow, winding road in a remote area. There had been nothing around for many miles, including other vehicles. We were both in a good mood, listening to a podcast or news radio, in a happy space like being on autopilot. Anyway, as we rounded a corner, an old woman appeared seemingly out of nowhere, and she appeared to be screaming at us and gesturing exaggeratedly toward the other side of the road. We were shocked to see her, obviously, and my ex tensed up but didn't react or expect to adjust our lane quickly. And we realized that we were driving on the wrong side of the road. no sooner than we switched lanes and we made it to the next bend in the highway, an 18-wheeler came hauling butt around the curve. Had we not moved over, we definitely would have been dead on the spot. After we made it through this moment, we debriefed. My ex is a devout skeptic, and neither one of us had an explanation, and we never really spoke of it again. The old woman had shoulder-length grey hair, and I don't remember what she was wearing, but she looked plain, outside of her appearing sort of spontaneously like that. I really do not have a logical explanation of where she could have come from. I doubt that Scotland employs a special fleet of feral woodland traffic grandmas too, so there's that. This happened about 10 years ago now, when I lived in Boston with my husband. I had totally forgotten all about it, but something that I read today reminded me of it, so I thought that I would share it. We lived in this old, terrible building in Jamaica Plains. It was our first place out of college, and it was cheap. That's all that mattered at the time, too. The building was one in a row of other apartment buildings that had separate entrances, but shared a common roof and basement. So you could enter one building, walk down to the basement, and access the basement of the other buildings too. Yeah, not very safe, right? Anyway, the shared laundry room for the 3 to 4 buildings was in the basement, and I hated being down there. It was cold and always had that eerie fluorescent lighting with 1 or 2 lights flickering that just made you depressed. Most of the other residents were college students and were at class during the day. I worked nights back then, so I used some of the daytime hours to do laundry, since the laundry room was pretty empty at that time. Luckily on this day, my husband was off from work too, so we were just sort of hanging out, taking breaks from watching Netflix and cooking to go down there and load up the machines and all that. When we went down there to get our last load from the dryer, it still had a few minutes left, so we decided to wait for it. While we were talking, this man speed-walked into the laundry room. I was sitting on top of one of the broken machines at this point, and there was a list of don'ts on the wall that said not to do that. So at first, I thought that he was coming to give me a hard time about it, but then I noticed that he was really sort of disheveled looking. His clothes were dirty, he hadn't brushed his hair or shaven for a long time, and he looked like he was definitely on something. He came up to me and held out this large piece of colored craft paper and said, "You need to have this." I took it and looked down at it. It looked like something that kids would make at Sunday school, or maybe something that would be posted on a pin-up board at a church and listed the 10 Commandments. Well, 6 or 7 of them anyway, because it had been ripped. His eyes, though, looked totally crazed, massive pupils and bloodshot, and he was looking at my body in a really creepy way. He was either on a ton of something or was having a mental episode. Who knows, maybe both even. He seemed like he was waiting for me to say something back and getting a bit impatient about it, but I didn't exactly know what to say. My mind was just sort of stuck in reboot, I guess. I was trying to think of a rational reason why he would give a stranger a piece of craft paper with some commandments on it, but there probably wasn't a rational reason, right? My husband eventually broke the silence, though, and said, "Hey man, thanks, that's great." The guy seemed satisfied with that, mumbled something under his breath, and went out of the laundry room and back into the connecting hallway. Once he was gone, we got our laundry, went upstairs, and we called the landlord. She called the cops, but once they got there, they couldn't find him. I highly doubt that they searched all the floors of the buildings, but he could have just left, so I don't really know. I also don't know if he would have hurt me if I was alone, but I definitely wouldn't have defused or handled the situation as easily. Needless to say, though, I never went down there alone again. Earlier this year, my husband went through a terrifying, life-threatening thing, and not to go into any details, but at the point of this story, he was still in bed, bedbound in fact, and we were staying at my parents' house. Now, some relevant background first. My parents' house is big, 2 floors plus, and a rooftop apartment, and a basement. It's pretty old though, and needs something fixed every other month or so. My dad is very old school, and he deals with people he likes, even if they overcharge him. He's been using the same plumber for years, for instance, same electrician, same gardener, etc. This happened back in my home country, Jordan. The country is mostly Muslim, but my family is Christian. So, we wake up that day and the whole kitchen is flooded. My dad had recently got a new water filter installed, and it was giving them trouble since the beginning. My dad had to leave, but he called his water filter guy, which is really specific, I know, but to come and fix whatever was going on. Water filter guy said that he'll be there in a couple of hours, but about an hour later, the doorbell rings and my bro opens the door. It's a man in a suit with a little briefcase. My brother thought that it was one of the doctors for my husband, so he immediately invited him in. The man then corrects him and says that he's not a doctor, that he's apparently there for the water filter. My mum knows the water filter guy, and this wasn't him, but she just assumed that the original guy just sent this guy ahead instead. So my mum asks what he needs. I'm in and out of this whole situation as I care for my husband, but the man goes to the roof to look at the water tanks, and he took pictures. Came back down and sat in the kitchen with my mum, telling her what he thinks the issue is. Tanks need replacing and how much they'll cost and all that. So my mum calls my dad and passes the phone to the man, who gives my dad the rundown. And then my dad says that he'll talk to his original guy about the price. The man then starts arguing with my dad on the phone to the point that my dad basically yells at him and hangs up. At this point, my mum kind of apologetically asks him to leave and that my dad will just talk to his boss because that's what he prefers. The man says, "What boss?" She tells him his name, and the man says that he's never heard of that guy before in his life. Now, my mum is freaking out. She asks who sent him, and he says nobody. So she asks him how much she owes him so she can quickly get him out of the house. He says that he noticed the man in the hospital bed, and his only payment is that he's going to ask God to heal him. And then he left, and that was it. My dad's actual guy showed up a little later and fixed the filter in the end, but my mum and I were shook by the whole thing. We talked about it in detail for hours. We talked to my dad and my dad's guy and the nurse that was there that day and my brother who opened the door, and none of us could figure out how this happened or who this guy was. This man just showed up to check water filters on the same day the water filters burst, but didn't want any compensation. Nobody sent him? Like, how, right? It still bugs me, and I mean, my mum thinks that he's a freak or a demon, or I just don't know. I was going through a lot at that time, so I don't recall everything in absolute detail, but I'm wondering if anyone else has ever experienced anything like this, and if so, do you have any suggestions, help, or any ideas as to what we should do about it? Oh, and my husband is doing much better, thankfully. He's about 90% recovered and still healing a bit, but otherwise, we're all doing okay, I guess. I was always an extremely small and sickly child. I looked young for my age, and my family and I lived out of town, about 8 miles out. Our little community was also next to a highway. The school bus would drop me off 2 blocks away from home, and one day I noticed a red truck following slowly behind me, so slow that I figured that they were just looking for a house or something. I ignored it and walked to my house, but that was just the beginning of it. Consistently, this truck would follow slowly behind me. After a couple of days of this, I walked into my house. I was always the first one home, and looked out the window, and inside was an older man and a black lab. He was staring at me, idling outside inside of his truck. Then he just pulled away. It was at this point that I decided that enough was enough. I told my parents. Of course my sister was quick to jump in that I was lying. I will admit that I had a habit of telling stories at this age, but my mum thankfully believed me. She drove me to the bus stop the next morning. The red truck was there, across the street at the gas station, pointing toward the bus. I got on the bus and my mum decided to drive around the truck. She described the scene this way. The man was disheveled and dirty, hunched over his seat just staring at the bus. His license plates were caked in mud, so she couldn't make them out. It freaked her out so much too that she called the police and the school. I went to school that day and was quickly pulled into the office. The man had apparently been spotted at the school waiting in his truck. That day I rode the bus home, but this time the truck was parked alongside the street, which meant that I would have to walk past this man's driver's side door to get home. I debated considering running for it. Apparently this man was getting desperate now that he was spotted. But a police car showed up, and I talked to the policeman. They went to go talk to the man, but as soon as they started to get closer, he quickly pulled away from the curb in high speed and absolutely flew down the highway. I never did see him again after that, and although I do think the police pursued him, I don't believe that he was ever caught. Because of this experience, I'm extremely guarded and paranoid with my own daughter and her soon-to-be sibling. The world is a terrifying place sometimes, especially these days, and children go missing so easily. I don't like to think about it if I'd been grabbed. I wouldn't be here sharing this if that was the case. My kids wouldn't exist. I truly think that I was lucky, and many children aren't. Growing up, I, a 29-year-old female, I actually lived in a haunted house. My sisters and mother all have an affinity for the paranormal, but I am too scared to allow myself to see it. Every time something unexplainable happened, I would always run away, ignore it, pretend it never happened, and just try to distract myself. Examples would be hearing my parents call my name when I know that I'm home alone, hearing sort of clicking noises that are coming from the middle of an empty room, clearly seeing someone standing in the corner as I pass by, doing a double take for them to just no longer be there. But one night, when I was about 19, I was staying up late watching cartoons and just drawing. It was about 2 a.m. when my dog picked up her head and started looking towards the middle of my room. She bolted back as if something freaked her out, and then immediately got off my bed and ran to the middle of this room, barking hysterically at something that I couldn't see. This immediately gave me goosebumps, and I called my dog back multiple times, trying to get her back to my bed and make her calm down. But she just wouldn't stop. And then it happened. I felt something, and it was honestly like someone squeezed my legs. I had both my legs out in front of me, sitting up, and they were under blankets. I felt it, but I thought that I was imagining it at first. But then I looked down to see, clear as day, 2 large hand-shaped imprints over the blankets, slowly running from below my knees up to my thighs. My lights were on, and I was sober. I was fully awake. There was no denying that it happened. I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do. Not that I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I was just panicking. I started crying and called for my younger sister, sleeping in another room next to me, over and over, until she woke up and came to my room. My dog didn't stop barking too until my sister came into my room. I had a full-blown panic attack after this, and it was terrifying. Another strange factor was that around this time too, we had a peeping Tom that was leaving lots of evidence of them looking through our windows, trying to open windows and even getting into our cars. He would leave handprints and forehead prints on our windows, and I think that I may have woken up while he was watching because he left a stepladder. He grabbed it from my side yard, and it was against my window on multiple occasions. Another time we found bare footprints outside of our window in the mud after a rainy night, but we never figured out who it was. but all my sisters and I have since moved out, and my parents haven't noticed anything else weird happening since we moved out. They didn't really notice it before either. I was the only one finding or pointing out the occurrences, I guess, but I know that these are two different situations, but sometimes I feel like they are related somehow, because they both happened at the same time. Anyway, I moved out a couple of years later with no reoccurrence of that night. It was one of the scariest experiences that I've ever had, and when I talk about this story out loud, I still tear up and get emotional about it. I do still experience, well, some small things depending on where I live. Thankfully, the house that I now own does not have any weird vibes or things happening after a couple of years of living here. So my girlfriend's mother is a long-time heroin user and has been in and out of jail for my girlfriend's whole life pretty much. When she lived with her mother and her mother's husband, she witnessed physical abuse and drug activity. She was forced to move out at a very young age in order to stay alive, and she thought that her mother was finally clean when her mother announced her pregnancy. After getting over the initial shock, my girlfriend decided to be supportive of her mother since she thought that she was clean. That was until her mother overdosed while pregnant. She decided to cut all contact at that point. My girlfriend is also a mandated reporter, and last year reported her mother and her mother's husband to the States since she knew that it wasn't a safe situation for the baby. Unfortunately, the baby died, and I won't go into details about how it all happened, but it was horrible to say the least. My girlfriend's mother was arrested, and her husband was arrested for child endangerment and other charges very recently, and at first, the judge did not grant either of them bail. Eventually, her husband was granted bail, in which he posted. We didn't know this until recently, which helped us to put some of the pieces together. My girlfriend and I like to sit outside her house in the car and just sort of chat or listen to music sometimes, and recently, there have been black cars around my girlfriend's house. She also is frequently followed by black cars when she drives me home. It's the same couple of black cars that do this too. They're not just random ones. And at first, we thought that we were just being paranoid since everyone was still in jail, right? But when we found out that the husband was out of jail, we began to doubt our insanity. The first major thing happened after my girlfriend and I went on a dinner date. We got home after dark and sat in a car for about 45 minutes before we noticed the same black car passing by us every few minutes. After 10 minutes of that, a different car drove towards us, flicking its high beams on when it got close enough for us to see who was inside. It swerved into the oncoming lane, and I genuinely thought that it was going to hit the passenger side of the car. It sped away, and after that we ran inside. And after this, we started noticing the black cars more and more. For instance, this past Wednesday morning around 3 a.m.-ish, the same distinct black van that we had seen being pulled up outside of my house was there. This was weird too because my girlfriend and I live about 30 minutes from each other in two separate cities. A man got out of the van and shined a flashlight through my yard, scanning it almost. He shined the flashlight up at the window that I was sitting at, kept it there for a second, then walked 30 feet to an empty driveway, scanned around there for 20 seconds before getting in the van and peeling away. The windows were ice-covered and frozen, so I couldn't make out the specifics of the van, but it was definitely strange. A few nights later, my girlfriend and I spent some time hanging out in the car when we spotted a black van hiding behind another parked car further up the street. We could only see one headlight, but it creeped by us as we sat in the car, and my girlfriend lives between two dead-end streets. Think of a very blocky U, I guess, but she lives between the two prongs, and the van went up the first dead end, 4 ways on, and sat for a few minutes before turning around and driving almost in the other lane of traffic to get close to us. It then went up the other dead end and stayed put. We thought that it was weird that the van didn't just back out of the first dead end, instead opting to drive all the way up the narrow street and turn around like that. After a few minutes, we call a friend and recount the story just to get an extra opinion. While my girlfriend was talking to our friend, I got out of the car to go for a cigarette and to see how far away the van was. I walked up the dead end that the van was on for about 15 feet before getting the worst gut feeling that I had ever gotten. Across the street from me was a black mass which was darker than the darkness around it. And at that, I decided to just turn around and rush my girlfriend into the house. Later that night, we heard a bang coming from downstairs, followed by what sounded like a boot on wooden stairs. We locked the bedroom door, and I sat against the door with a baseball bat, hopeful to barricade it. A few minutes later, we heard a car door slam before the sound of tires squealing and a car driving out of there. Our initial idea was maybe it came from the TV, but we had paused it, and the TV in the next room is never loud enough to feel real, I guess. When I went downstairs an hour later to get some water, there was nothing damaged or missing, though. We theorized that maybe it was the sound of the front door trying to be opened, even though it was deadbolted. My girlfriend's exterior wall doesn't face the road, and we've never heard car sounds before. It is, however, next to the private driveway, and sometimes we will hear her grandparents' car door close or the neighbors backing out or whatever. But the next day, I was shoveling the sidewalks at my girlfriend's house, an activity that took about 20 minutes, and I saw that same black Chevy Silverado with mud streaks on the tailgate. It circled the block about 4 times, and I was able to see the silhouette of a man driving through the passenger side window, and each time it's always been the same man and the same truck. My girlfriend lives in a small town too, and we've been able to catalogue the neighborhood cars pretty well. The black van and the truck are definitely abnormal. Our theory is that someone is trying to scare my girlfriend into not testifying, or flat out making sure that neither of us ever have the ability to testify. We really just need opinions at this stage. Are we just paranoid, or do you think that this is something that we should actually be worried about? Do you think that these are just weird coincidences, or is there something more going on? This happened a few months back. I, a 37-year-old male, currently moved back in with my senior parents. My parents have lived in the same neighborhood for almost 35 years now. It's quite nice and upscale, and the houses don't go up for sale often, so I've known all the neighbors for years. Recently, though, the house directly next door was sold from grandmother to grandson, so since it's been vacant a little while, the cleanup began this summer, and skip to the end of summer, my mother and I are outside on the porch smoking, and the grandmother next door had just up and started doing some landscaping in the front yard alone. We exchanged hellos, and she went digging in the flowers, I think. About 10 minutes later, though, a disheveled-looking, tall, skinny lady starts strolling through the neighborhood with luggage and a backpack. Now, this might be normal where you live, but it was not in this neighborhood. We are not really on the beaten path anywhere. Like, you would need a reason to go into my area. It's not a shortcut anywhere or anything like that. And anyway, immediately everybody was uneasy. Her actions and behavior just made my gut scream crazy or high as a kite on hard drugs or something. She passed our porch and goes straight to the edge of the neighbor's yard and starts talking loudly. I keyed up, starting to ready myself. Then she approached closer to my neighbor, continued talking, then backed up to the edge of the yard. She continues talking loudly and then repeats the same behavior, only this time she gets closer, then back to the street a third time, even closer again. I'm a pretty big guy and am heavily tattooed, so I'm fairly intimidating looking, and I know it, although I'm a big teddy bear to be honest, but I get up and walk to the end of the porch for a better look, and this crazy chick goes in for a 4th time and got right next to my neighbor at this point, and she looked scared, like my neighbor looked really scared. So I got up and yelled at the lady after taking off my shirt, and I was just like, "Hey, can I help you? Do you need something? If not, you should keep moving." No lie, I think she totally didn't realize that other people are outside in close proximity, but at that, she absolutely took off. She quickly vanished, and it was obvious that she was up to something. Thankfully, we haven't seen her since then, or anything like it again. About 10 years ago, there was 4 of us walking through the woods local to us. To get to the best entrance to the woods, you have to walk through a crematorium. There was me, Thomas, Lisa, and Alice, and we had planned to go camping in the woods. So, we'd been camping in these woods on many occasions. I had a very easygoing mum, so the parents of the other 3 would call my mum to ask if we were having a sleepover at my house, and my mum, being nice, said yes. We were all 13 at the time. We were walking through the woods to get where we normally camped, and on the way there we walked past a man with an axe. He didn't speak and just sort of stared us out, so we walked on and just sort of brushed it off. A little bit creeped out, but didn't think too much of it. The night went on as you would expect, having fun trying to drink and not be sick and just having a laugh with friends. We went into the tent to go to sleep at about 3 in the morning, but about 20 minutes later, we heard what sounded like trees being axed down. The sound echoed around the woods and made us all alert. This went on for about 5 minutes. Then, as soon as it sort of started to finish, Thomas joked about the man with the axe, and Alice got rather upset with him. Time passed, and just as we were about to go to sleep, we suddenly heard footsteps. They were circling around our tent, and we all sat up in shock and started to panic. We heard logs of wood being dropped outside of our tent. We could actually feel the wood as it struck the ground. We all gained the courage to finally look out of the tent, peering out. He was there, sat on the floor, staring into the tent as we opened it. We just all bailed as soon as we saw that and ran as fast as we could from them into the woods. We never did go back to get our stuff or anything, not that we really brought too much, but all of this time, all the times that I've been out there since, I never saw him again. The weird thing too was that this guy, he never seemed to talk. He was just sitting there, staring at us in the tent. 10 years on, and I still think about that night, and exactly what that guy may have been up to. So a few days back, I went into a mall a bit far from my house, and things were really good that day, but then, while I was in a KFC branch, someone on Grindr with a blank profile messaged me while waiting for my food on the table, but I shrugged it off and he didn't send me any pictures, just messages saying hi to me and asked if he could give me the best, and you can imagine what he said, I would ever have. Seeing that I'm in a public place and absolutely do not have the mood to be horny, I did not reply and then proceeded to eat my meal. After eating, I then left the mall while bringing the items that I brought from there and waited for a ride to go home. It was dark, around 8 p.m. at that time, so I had to be vigilant on my surroundings. While looking out on the road, the same guy messages me and asks me where I am currently, and I saw suddenly that his distance from me was only 70 meters away from where I was standing. This was definitely getting a bit worse, so I closed the app immediately and proceeded to continue ignoring him. Around 5 minutes later, a guy stood beside me though, trying to act sort of unsuspicious, I think, even though my gut feelings are telling me that something was wrong. He looked like he was around maybe late 30s. I'm 18 by the way, and a bit bigger than me, both height and weight. I started to get goosebumps while standing beside him, and it only got worse when he tapped on my shoulder and asked if he could do those things that he mentioned to me before. I froze, having no idea what to do, while extremely anxious, but then I suddenly just, punched him in the face when he started trying to grab my crotch and tried to unbutton my pants. I then pushed him off of me hard. He was now down on the ground and I ran away as far as I could. But then I saw him chasing me. Luckily, a taxi drove nearby and I rushed inside as quickly as I could. I knew that it was him who was the guy that had been spamming messages on Grindr because his Grindr profile tells me that he's only literally 1 meter away. I blocked the profile and I logged out of the app after that. But what I realized is that I wasn't logged out at the time. Therefore, my location was exposed, and my profile picture in the app was my face, which wasn't covered. meaning that it was easy for me to be identified. Also, the location of the mall is pretty terrible as there isn't a lot of lights around it, and it's surrounded by really terrible looking houses and roads too. Worse yet is that there weren't really many people around where I stood at the time, and it was pretty dark where we were too, meaning I wasn't really able to identify the man correctly to report him to the local authorities, unfortunately, but also it was the perfect place for a crime. This happened to me and my siblings when we were very young, but the memory is still very vivid. This was the most intense paranormal experience that I've had in my life, and I just wanted to get it out there. So, to start, the house that we lived in at the time was definitely haunted. My sister told me much later on that she would hear someone walking up the stairs and then a shadowy figure would stand in a doorway sometimes. I heard the footsteps back then too, but I'd always assumed that it was just her walking around. She didn't tell me until much later, obviously, as she didn't want to scare me. But the house was very creepy at night. I always felt a profound sense of being watched whenever I would go past certain spots. It was completely different when I got back home to Mum's house. I wasn't afraid of the dark, and I would still get up at night to go to the bathroom. But it always felt very scary to do so, and I would always hurry as quickly as I could. But anyway, I was 10, my big sister was 13, and my little brother was 8. I begged my older sister to let us play with a Ouija board, a keychain toy that she had, because I was fascinated by ghosts and the supernatural. I wasn't really scared of them at all, in fact. I loved them a lot and only thought that they were interesting, I guess you could say. It took a whole lot of convincing, but eventually she agreed to play with the board. So we all sat down at the kitchen table, and my sister and I put our fingers on the planchette and asked if anybody was there, to which it almost immediately said yes. We spent some time arguing that the other was definitely moving it, and just asking some benign questions I don't really remember. But after a bit, we started getting scared, so we said let's stop. The planchette immediately and harshly moved to no, though, and we instantly pulled our hands back. As soon as we did, we all hear this terrible and horrible screeching or scream, one that did not sound human at all. We each describe it a little bit differently from one another, but we all heard it at once, that was for sure. We ran as fast as we could to the other room, where we all sat sort of huddled on the couch for a long time. Finally, I asked if anybody else had heard that, to which they all just nodded. We stayed that way for hours too, until my dad came home. We didn't tell him about it, and nothing really ever came of it too, but it was terrifying. So terrifying that, to this day, recalling it always gives me chills. Also, for info on the actual sound, it was definitely not a cat. We didn't live near the woods either. We lived right in the middle of the city, so no mountain lion or anything like that too. It didn't sound like an animal call actually, but my brother said that it sort of sounded like the sound of a bunch of bats, but much, much louder. The intensity of the sound was part of it, and like someone screaming right inside of the kitchen. To me, it was a lot like a woman's scream, but distorted, like it was more than one voice maybe. To those who just don't want to believe it's anything otherworldly, well, yeah, that's totally okay, and I don't know what else to say to you. I'm just telling you my experience. That's totally your choice, and like I said, I'm just telling my story for those who might be interested. So I'm staying at my friend's house in Tennessee over winter break, and tonight I helped her feed the neighbors' dogs because they were out of town. Her house is in a somewhat rural area. There's clusters of homes kind of sort of spread out across fields, forests, and lake areas, all very beautiful and lots of wildlife. Anyways, it's about 9 p.m. and it's way past sunset. It's quite dark, and we're walking the short distance from the neighbor's house back to hers, We're on a road that, sort of directly next to us, is a small set of woods sloping down into the lake. I'm a little nervous about it, so I make a joke like, that forest is kind of creeping me out. Imagine if there's a skinwalker in there. My friend said it's bad luck to share it or say it, but I didn't know that until after this event, and I'm not taking any chances, so she laughs and gobbles like a turkey loudly into the forest. She's like this, and I jokingly say, don't do that, it might attract one. And not even 5 seconds later, we hear an identical gobble back at us from the forest. It was definitely not an echo too, and there was no light in there, no paths, and it was very cold, like 30 degrees, so I can't imagine anyone would be out there. But I just remember saying, oh my goodness, then sprinting as fast as I could back to the house. I don't think I've ever run so fast or meaningfully too. I didn't turn back, and I was completely out of breath when we got back to the house. My friend thought the whole thing was kind of funny, but also freaky. But I just cannot get over the fact that we heard that sound repeated back at us, and there's just no way that an animal would make that kind of noise, especially not so accurately. Anyway, does anyone know what this might be? Maybe it was just someone trying to be funny or something? I don't know. I'm really confused by it, and it was a really freaky situation. When I was a kid in Mexico, we loved to play hide and seek with all the kids in the neighborhood at night. The houses were so close together, in fact, that you could jump from roof to roof, and with everybody sort of knowing each other and being friendly, they wouldn't mind if we did get on the roof. We had my cousins come over for dinner, and our parents were just out in the porch talking, having a couple of drinks. Some of the kids, they came over and asked if we wanted to play. It was already dark out, and this is when we especially liked to play, so we agreed. There was this one girl too that I had a thing for at the time, and they also happened to join that night, and I knew that if I could get her alone, I might have a chance to kiss her. I knew that she liked me too, so it would work out. We all gathered in the middle of the street, and we randomly chose who would count, then all the other kids would run and hide. So as the kids started counting, I looked at the girl waving at her to come follow me. Holding my hand, I led her to my aunt's house, which was vacant at the time. She was on vacation, and I knew the house was empty. I didn't see any other kids go in there. The front door was locked, so we ran to the back and checked if it was locked too. And it was, but at the back of the house, my aunt had an old washing machine that I knew that we could get on the roof from there. I helped her up first, and when we got up, we could hear someone coming, and I told her to go and hide, and she ran off. I was able to make it on the roof not long after, and I knew for sure that somebody was searching the house next to my aunt's. It was having the second story redone, and I hid in a sort of half-completed bathroom. I thought that I was alone too, but at some point I felt someone grab my hand. It was pitch black in there, I couldn't see who it was, but I heard a soft voice whisper, "It's just me, don't worry." It was most definitely her, so she squeezed my hand a little bit more. We hid for some time, and it was great. But then, from afar, we could all hear the kids saying, "We give up," and we had won the round. I came out of the bathroom and looked down at the street where all the other kids were. And that was when I saw her, clear as day, looking at me. I froze. If she was down there, then whose hand was I holding? Slowly turning my head, I could still feel the grip of whoever's hand I was holding, with it still being dark, and all I could manage to see was the faint outline of someone with, like, glowing sort of red eyes looking right in my face. When I say glowing, I don't mean like fully glowing, but they look sort of a bit red. At that, I absolutely panicked. I got down from the roof and I jumped down to where the kids were, and they were all pointing up and behind me, asking me who that was. They could see the outline of someone up there too, and also what looked like red eyes. We stopped playing immediately and went inside one of the other kids' houses. We talked about what we saw, but only briefly before going back outside again, but when we did, whoever was there was now gone. So this is the most wild and crazy thing that I've ever experienced, and I know that it sounds absolutely insane, but I just have to tell someone, and I really would like to try and find some answers for whatever the heck this was. So when I was 20 years old, I was driving past Parker, Arizona, when my boyfriend accidentally took a wrong turn. We quickly realized something was wrong too, because as soon as we turned that corner, it was like everything just went dark. Like there was absolutely no sun anywhere. Keep in mind, it was about 1 or 2 p.m. in the spring. There's no mountains anywhere or large trees or anything. Nothing that could cast like a massive shadow or anything. It was clear blue skies, and then all of a sudden it was just pitch black. No buildings or noises, just blank emptiness. We turned the headlights on, in fact, because it was that dark, when all of a sudden there was a big white sign on the side of what I believe was a road. On the side it said, in big letters, "They're here, turn around, now." We both looked at each other and we just said, yeah, to heck with that. And we quickly turned around. After a while, we found the freeway again, and it was honestly like the sun just came back on. We went home and we decided that we would just probably never speak about it to anyone because it was just so weird. But to be honest, I've been haunted by this experience, this really weird and creepy thing that happened to us my whole life, and still to this day, I just have no idea what to think about it. I'm a 22-year-old female now, and I still get goosebumps thinking about the situation and whether or not I would even be here today had I not been such an untrusting child. So I used to ride my bike around my neighborhood and through the local parks a lot when I was younger, being a generally safe area at the time. Not so much now, but I digress. My parents felt comfortable with me riding my bike alone as long as I stayed nearby. And one summer afternoon, when I was 10 years old or so, I can't be certain as it was a long time ago, but it was around 9 or 10, I decided to ride my bike through the park near my elementary school. I ended up running into a friend and her mum at the playground there and spent a bit of time with them before they left. Looking back, I don't recall noticing anyone lingering nearby, but I was an oblivious kid having fun at the park, so there very well could have been, but I just didn't see them. Anyway, I wasn't really having much fun at the park by myself, so I decided to get back on my bike. It was then, though, that a man, maybe late 30s or 40s, approached me pretty much out of nowhere. I was sitting on my bike, kickstand still down, when he came up to me and asked me what my name was. I was a very shy kid, so I don't think that I said anything in response, but he didn't seem to care. He told me that I was a very pretty little girl and that he had a daughter my age that I could come play with. In addition to being extremely shy, my parents had also taught me about the whole stranger danger thing, so I wasn't about to go with this man. After I shook my head at him, I remember him smiling at me in the most unnerving way before putting his hand on my shoulder. I felt uncomfortable the whole encounter, but it wasn't until this moment that I really felt afraid. I quickly kicked the kickstand up and pedaled away as fast as I could manage. I didn't bother looking back until I made it onto the streets just outside of the park. He thankfully hadn't followed me, but I still felt scared, so I went home. I never told my parents or anybody else about this encounter. I know that I probably should have, but for some reason my kid brain thought that I would get in trouble and not be allowed to ride my bike anymore, so I decided to just forget about it. Looking back now, it makes me feel nauseous to think about what might have happened to me had I gone with that man or hesitated to pedal away. I'm very thankful that my parents had been serious about teaching me not to talk to or go out with strangers. I'm maybe even a bit thankful for my social anxiety, as honestly, it probably saved my skin that day. So I think that this all started with the nightmares. I've had a history in the past with ghosts and ghouls. A ghost attached itself to my brother when we were younger and would angrily throw things at him. We named her Cadence. My sister said Cadence would play hide and seek with her, showing up in the corner of her eye, only to duck out of view when my sister would turn to look at her. And when I moved out at 16, Cadence didn't follow me. And this, whatever I'm dealing with, is something different, more negative. It started earlier this week, like I said, with the nightmares. The first one was about Kisaragi Station. If you don't know what it is, you can look it up, but I encountered many people at the station, and when I got on, I arrived at a giant field with a dog. I don't really remember much after that. I also don't remember the second nightmare. The third, however, was yesterday night. In it, I was being chased through a small portal under some stairs. Writing this now, I'm realizing that my last apartment had a staircase with a giant hole under it too. My cat ran under there once, and I felt nearly feral with primal fear that gripped me when I got close to that hole, but anyway, in the nightmare, the person chasing me was a cannibal. I don't know how I knew, but I just knew it in the dream, and we eventually came to a standoff. I was really close to her, but just out of her sight, and she was sort of looking away, but all she had to do was turn and she would see me. And she did. She turned slowly, eyes wide as she stared at me. I stared back in complete terror. She saw me and reached out to me, grabbing my hand harshly, and I woke up, slowly, filled with chest-crunching terror. I could still feel the woman's grip on my hand as I woke up, in fact, nearly crushing my fingers. For context, I sleep curled up every night, sometimes on my back, but never with my hand anywhere near the edge of my full-sized bed. But I woke up with my hand dangling off the side of my bed, reaching out. I suddenly felt eyes on me from the closet and stared. With complete certainty, the only thought that I had was demon. Spooked like heck, I stayed awake and considered asking my Catholic roommate to bless my room, or at least the apartment. Silly, right? But my roommate had done it before and it was all fine. That is, until my cat broke their Mary statue. After the statue broke, that was when the smell started, like something had rotted in our apartment. My roommate's senior cat started getting nervous too. She used to never meow, but she meows constantly now, and one time we even heard her on the other side of the apartment while we were checking the mail, and we just heard her screeching like crazy. Confused, we rushed back over to our apartment on the other floor and opened our apartment door to find the cat staring at the door and practically howling at it. This morning, we also found a huge bloodstain on my roommate's pillow. Frowning, I checked her cat over because we thought maybe the cat had bled on it, but she was spotless. My roommate shrugged it off, and eventually we just washed the bloodstains off. But that was definitely really weird. Anyway, what do you guys think? Is this a demon? Can anyone give me some guidance on how to handle this? I feel like I'm going crazy over all of this, and I'd really like some help. When I was a kid, for a long time, my family and I lived in an apartment building in Chicago. In this building, we experienced, many weird things that felt sort of evil, I guess. One of the experiences that I had, I wanted to share with all of you. So, to get into this apartment building, you sort of had to enter through a gate. After entering the gate, you would just follow the cemented path would probably take maybe 5 seconds to get to some stairs. Going up the stairs, you would see windows to the first floor apartment straight ahead. Looking to the right, there would be a door that would allow you to enter the apartment complex. And now, entering through this door would take you to an extremely small room with 2 doors. The door to the left would take you to the first floor apartment. The door to the right would take you to the apartment where I lived, the second floor. As you entered through the door to the right, it would lead to an almost spiral staircase. After reaching the top of the stairs, you would yet again reach another door, which would actually take you fully inside the second floor apartment. Opening the door, you would immediately see the living room. So one afternoon, I was home alone watching anime in the living room. I was maybe 15 when this happened, and I remember hearing someone open up the first door to get into the building, and the second door to get into the second floor apartment. I began to hear someone walk up the stairs. At this time of day, I was under the assumption that either my mum was done with work or my brother was done with wrestling practice, getting home, which I was excited to not be home by myself. As the footsteps get closer to the door, I glanced at the bottom of the door, which I then saw a shadow there. Usually at this moment, I would hear keys, as someone would be preparing to unlock the door. But in this incident, I didn't. I just saw a shadow under the door. I also started to hear like a slow scratching sound starting from the top of the door to the bottom. I honestly thought that my brother was being an idiot, playing a prank on me, so I just let it be and continued watching TV. As I was watching TV, I noticed the scratching continued on the door, getting more and more intense, and the shadow of someone was still present under the door. At this point, I was getting pretty annoyed too, because I was like, dude, I'm trying to watch TV, quit playing games with me. So I got up from the couch and went to the door and I smashed it open. But as I sort of swung it open, I looked around and I didn't see my mum or my brother or anyone. So then I thought, this idiot is behind the door. So I checked behind the door and no one was there either. I did check the back of the door though, and I did see scratch marks on my door. At this, my heart started racing and I ran down the stairs and ran out of my apartment, called my brother up, and he was still at wrestling, and my mum was still out too. So then, the question is, who the heck was scratching at my door like that? So I was 8 in 1994 and living in Staten Island. Back then I would walk to the store by myself. My parents didn't really watch me and sometimes would even ask me to buy them cigarettes. And one time I was walking and an old 70s brown Buick was following me slowly. Then, close to the store, he pulled up next to me and was trying to get me to help him with something. I was a pretty smart kid who could take care of herself, probably from being left alone so often, so I knew that this was really shady. I ran a few blocks until I got to the store and went inside, and a few minutes later, he walks in and is following me through the aisles. I quickly thought to tell the clerk, but I didn't trust him either. I'd already had a lot of bad things happen to me at this point in my life and didn't really trust anyone. So then I thought to use the payphone and call my parents collect. So that's what I did and really loudly said that I don't feel safe and someone's following me. The dude ran out of the store so quickly after that. My dad picked me up and he spent the rest of the day looking for this car, and I didn't get the license plate, so we never found him. But I think about this a lot because it's not like he gave up after that too. I'm sure that he must have found a victim eventually, and to me, that's perhaps the most heartbreaking thing about this, is that I couldn't stop that. So last night, I was skiing and camping out of my RV in an unofficial secret spot. High in the Sierra Nevadas of California, the location was right next to one of the most imposing peaks of the area, at the base of which was a frozen lake and resort closed for the season. Sparse trees surrounded the lake, and a sort of pillowy fog hung over the icy expanse at dawn and dusk. Obscured by banks of snow from the adjacent highway, plow drivers had only bothered to clear a small portion of the road into this resort. It was the perfect place to hide out for a few nights. As soon as I tucked into bed, I started to hear the strange noises again, though. This time, they wouldn't stop. From the absolute darkness and the otherwise total silence of a blanket of snow, I swore that I could hear something moving. Not human footsteps, but it sounded like, I don't know, 2 snow shovels piercing the ground. Quietly but quickly it traveled. Through my open windows, I suddenly felt an intense feeling of being watched as well. Whatever this was, It came from towards the lake, a path which is covered in 3 feet of powder. The noises got louder until it was right up to the side of my window. Terrified and afraid to even make a sound, I lay in my bed watching and listening. Only a thin bug screen separated me from this creature in the pitch darkness. On a night without even a breath of wind to cause the sensation, I felt my RV pitch from side to side all of a sudden. It had climbed to the top, and as it clambered about, I heard the now familiar noise of the night's frozen dew cracking under its weight. I could hear the ice fragments shed off the edges of my home and burst upon hitting the ground. I say familiar too because I had heard these noises before. On the first night, ice had also fallen with the sound of footsteps and the shaking of the RV. Thinking that it was a person up to no good, I charged outside with a flashlight and a knife. After all, the paranormal usually has a logical explanation, right? Examining the site carefully, though, there wasn't so much as a new print in the snow. Satisfied, and with the noises gone, I slept unperturbed for the rest of the night. The second night, my brother slept in the room, and I heard the ice crack again, but no more. Neither compared to this third night. Judging from the amount the RV rocked as the entity moved, it was lightweight, I would guess, and agile. It was clever enough to completely stop moving as a car from the highway approached as well, long before lights would dimly illuminate the campsite even. It watched me, even when it seemed to stop. It seemed to climb down from the roof. I could hear its snow shovel feet crunch into the ground as it began to sort of pace around my camper, I would guess. The creature alternated from roof and sides, and it was then that I realized that it was looking for a way in. Breaking free from my petrification, I gently rolled over in bed and shut the 2 windows next to my head, covering them with the blinds. It noticed. I immediately heard the shoveling retreat, but it didn't leave altogether. Straining my ears, I could tell that it was pacing about maybe 30 yards away. Even though there was no wind, what sounded like a metal sign sort of clanging against a tree persisted. I tiptoed to my knife and clutched it against me, and eventually I fell into a fitful sleep like that. I had a pleasant dream about my grandparents that night. At the end, it changed though. I was on the couch of the camper, and from a roof vent above me, a dark ooze draped into my space. Gathering my courage, I unsheathed my knife and thrust at the shape with a shout. To my surprise, I was still in bed. My knife was sheathed, and I had just stabbed a guitar, I think. Still, it was too topically relevant of a dream, and I wanted to stay and sleep, but I also didn't want to be around whatever this was anymore. I brandished my knife and headlamp, bursting out of my door. My light whipped wildly about, looking for any evidence of this creature that had visited. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no roof ice, nothing on the ground, no metal sign attached to any tree for clanging. There was literally nothing. And so, it was at this point that I jumped into the driver's seat and I just got out of there. I slept at a nearby populated campsite until dawn, and not a single noise, even with the window wide open. So, what was that thing? What did it want? Or am I just going crazy? Surely there must be an explanation for what I just experienced, but I don't know. I'm not so sure, to be honest. As I share this, my mind keeps going back to the dream of the darkness oozing in through the ceiling. Since I slept in the populated campsite without incident, I believe that it's gone. I keep a Nazar amulet watching my bed for these kinds of superstitious reasons, I guess. It might sound silly, but I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't afraid to go to bed tonight. So my parents got divorced when I was 12, and my mum moved us into a small town in the Pennsylvania mountains. After a few months of living there, I went back to live with my dad in Texas. Ever since then, though, I've heard these voices of people that I know calling me into the woods. It's been almost 8 years now, and It's only when I'm alone, but not every time too that I'm alone. And it seems to only happen here in Texas. It's weird, but I never even considered that it was maybe something to be concerned about, until recently, I guess. It was just something that happened. I even followed the voice once and only thought that it was kind of weird that I had heard my dad screaming for me if he didn't actually call me because I got home later and asked him about it. I don't know if this is related to or not, but remembering that it was what sparked this post, a few years ago I was about a mile out into the woods in Pennsylvania when I zoned out for a minute. When I zoned in, I heard a stick snap and I looked over to see a white-tailed doe staring at me from about maybe 10 feet away, and it sort of looked almost as if it had been trying to sneak closer to me when I looked at it. I just sort of backed away from it and went down the mountain, but as I was backing away, it looked at me with a sentience that, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I'm not entirely sure what to make of any of this now, but I am looking back on all the times that I just sort of brushed it off as normal and now rethinking things. But what do you guys think? Should I follow the voices?